by God in the form of the Vicar of Christ on earth, the Pope, and spurning God in their turn, the Knights Templars banded together in secret and formed what was to become known as Freemasonry. Now the legend goes that Freemasonry sprang up from ancient stonecutters' guilds and the men who built the stone buildings of the age. But Freemason actually comes from the French, Free Mason, which literally means the sons of light. Which light? Well, certainly in researching the problem, it is not the light of Christ. It is the light of the fallen angel of light. For when they were forsaken by the church, by Christ's vicar on earth, the Pope, they spurned God and turned to Lucifer. They held to the Luciferian philosophy, that the gift of intellect by Lucifer, through his agent Satan, would in its turn make man God. These men were always on the run. They took the hidden Templar wealth and built a financial empire that stands to this day as the most powerful on the earth. Jews who had traditionally been persecuted throughout Europe flocked to the hidden temple. For there they could believe as they wished and worship whatever God they wished, for all were welcome. Many of the Templars running to ground flocked to England and to Scotland, where they fought for Robert the Bruce, who was engaged in an intense battle with the King of England. Now, let me regress just a little bit. King William the Lion, who was born in 1165 and died in 1214, had a daughter, Isabel of Scotland. Well, Isabel married a certain Robert Rose. Robert Rose was a Knight Templar who was heavily involved in the first efforts and was very successful at international banking. Plus, he established the first overt and covert international intelligence gathering organization, which all subsequent intelligence organizations have been based upon since. His son, Sir William Roos, and his daughter, Lucy Roos, figure prominently in the story to follow. Lucy married Sir Robert Plumpton. They sired two children, Sir William Plumpton and Alice Plumpton. During this period of time, this family, as the Knights Templar were going to ground, and the male progeny of this family always followed their father's footsteps and entered into the order. They established in secret the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and may have had a significant role in the establishment, for intelligence reasons, of the order known as the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross. Now, Alice Plumpton married Sir John Boteler. They gave birth to a daughter, Alice Boteler, who then married John Gerard, who had a child, Constance, who married Sir Alex Standish. The following children issued from that marriage: Ralph Standish, Sir Alex Standish, Roger Standish, and Alice Standish, who then married James Prescott. The children of this marriage were Roger Prescott, Ralph Prescott, John Prescott, and Captain Jonathan Prescott. Jonathan Prescott married Rebecca Buckley. They had two children, Abel Prescott and Lucy Prescott, and Lucy married Jonathan Fay. They sired three children, Samuel Prescott Phillips Fay, Samuel Howard Fay, and Harriet Eleanor Fay. Harriet married Reverend James Smith Bush, son of merchant Obadiah Bush. Their son, Samuel Prescott Bush, became the president of Buckeye Steel Castings Company of Ohio, a pioneer family of Franklin, Ohio, between Dayton and Cincinnati, and was one of the members of the Golden Circle and Order of the Quest, also known as the Jason Society, which gave issue to most of the political elite of the United States of America, who are, by the way, all, and I mean all without exception, related to each other. Now, Samuel Prescott Bush married, and his son Prescott Bush became a U.S. Senator from Connecticut, the director of Prudential Insurance, the director of CBS, a partner in Brown Brother Harriman, chairman National Republican Finance Committee, funds placed in Merrill Lynch accounts in Switzerland under the guidance of Donald Reagan. When he married, that marriage gave issue to the following: Prescott Bush II, an investment banker indicted for fraudulent banking practices; George Bush, chairman of Zapata Oil from 1963 to 64, chairman of the Republican Party, Harris County, Texas, when John F. Kennedy was killed, delegate to the GOP National Convention, 1964, 1968 member of the 90th and 91st Congress from Texas. From 1965 to 66, Nixon appointed Bush as ambassador to the United Nations to deal with China. He was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, chairman of the National GOP Party, vice president of the United States of America, and president of the United States of America. 4 other children were William H. Bush, James Bush, Jonathan Bush, and Nancy, who married Alex Ellis. The issue of George and Barbara Bush was Dorothy, who married William LeBond, John Ellis Bush, Neil Bush, son of the director of CIA, becomes director of Silverado Savings and Loan and launders CIA drug money. Silverado loses over $100 million and Neil goes unpunished. And the 2 other children, Marvin Pierce Bush and George Bush II. Folks, this intelligence was gathered by one of our agents, codenamed John Galt, who spent literally years in dusty libraries and books of genealogy. And I'm not going to tell you which libraries or how he arrived at this information, but it has been checked. It is absolutely accurate, and this is just one portion of the pedigree of George Bush, who's literally related to most of the royal families of Europe. We have found a direct connection between the Peasants' Rebellion in England, the French Revolution, the Ronald Reagan and George Bush political campaign, and the George Bush political campaign. As far as the Peasants' Rebellion goes, the Encyclopedia Britannica calls it a, quote, curiously spontaneous rebellion. Barbara Tushman, in her 14th century history, A Distant Mirror, said that the rebellion spread, quote, with some evidence of planning. Winston Churchill went even further. In his work, The Birth of Britain, he wrote, quote, throughout the summer of 1381 there was a general ferment. Beneath it all lay organization. Agents moved around the villages of central England in touch with a, quote, great society, unquote, which was said to meet in London. The spark of rebellion was being fanned vigorously, and finally the signal was given. Even though he had been arrested, excommunicated, and even now was a prisoner in the ecclesiastic prison at Maidstone in Kent, letters went out from priest John Ball and from other priests who followed him. Clerics were then the only literate class, so letters must have been received by local priests and were obviously intended to be shared with or read aloud to others. They all contained a signal to act now, which could put to rest the concept that the rebellion was simply a spontaneous convulsion of frustration that just happened to affect 100,000 Englishmen all at the same time. This from a letter from John Ball. In it he says, quote, John Ball gritteth you well all and doth yo to understand he hath rungen your bell. Now right and might, wile and skyle, Godspeed every dale, which means ideal. Now is time, unquote. From priest Jake Carter, quote, you have great need to take God with you in all your deeds, for now is time to be war, unquote. From priest Jake Truman, quote, Jake Truman doth you to understand that falseness and guile have reigned too long, and truth hath been set under a lock, and falseness reigneth in every flock. God do bote, for now is time, unquote. Now you'll notice that in every one of those quotes there was one phrase that stands out, and that phrase is now is time. One letter from John Ball, quote, St. Mary Priest, unquote, is worth quoting in its entirety. Even with the medieval English spelling, the meaning will be clear. Lechery and gluttony were frequent points in his accusations of high church leaders. Quote, John Ball sent Mary Priest great well all manner men bides him in the name of the Trinity. Father and Son and Holy Ghost stand mainly together in truth, and help is truth, and truth shall help you. Now reigneth pride in prize, and covets is hold, wise and lechery, withouten shame, and gluttony withouten blame. Envy reigneth with treason, and sloth is take in great season. God do bote, for now is time. Amen. Unquote. Now, folks, if you research the history of the French Revolution, you will hear that the spark, the word that spread through the country like wildfire, that ignited the rebellion in France, was, quote, now is the time. Literally the same phrase. Some say that in the American Revolution the same phrase was heard, and we find mention of it in several texts, but not like it was heard in the Peasants' Revolt in England, and not like it was heard in the French Revolution. But it was heard again in modern times. It was the campaign slogan of the Bush-Reagan campaign, and was used again in the Bush campaign. Now is the time. Now is the time. One famous photograph, staged by George Bush and selected by George Bush for publication in Life magazine, shows him lying in bed, holding the pyramid with the capstone in place, signaling to Masons, Freemasons, and members, the priests of the mystery schools around the world, that he is the one who will bring into fruition their ages, centuries, millennia-old dream of the New World Order. In our search for the Templars, we have followed them right to their gravestones. And on some of their gravestones, it shows the knight leaning back, reclining, with his feet resting upon a dog, denoting that he is the master. On most of the tombstones, however, we have found something unexpected: the skull and crossbones. Now, when the Knights Templars were persecuted, the fleet, they had vast fleets, an entire navy, disappeared. And no one, at least no one in the establishment historian group, claims to know where they went. But we have found them, folks. They became the pirates and hoisted their symbol of the skull and bones to the yardarm. They became the vast fleet of pirates who roamed the seas of the world and terrorized nations, navies, and merchantmen. And thus arose, from the initiation rites of the Templars, the initiatory rites of crossing the equator, the international date line, and others, and accounts for the brotherhood amongst the pirates of the world, even to establishing seaports that they owned and operated and where they could always find safety. Those in the land established what they called the Brotherhood of Death. Chapters were formed throughout the world. George Bush was initiated in the crypt, or what is known as the tomb, at Yale, into the Brotherhood of Death, also known as the Russell Trust, also known as the Skull and Bones. The research of many people have revealed what the interior of the crypt, or what is known as the tomb at Yale, the fraternity house of the Bonesmen, contains. And Anthony C. Sutton, in his monumental work, America's Secret Establishment, all about the Skull and Bones, and one other who wrote a magazine article and published it, revealed the initiation ceremony, revealed that swastikas were found inside the tomb, revealed that the altar is a pile of bones, and that the secret ceremony that George Bush underwent during his initiation was thus. On the day of his initiation, George Bush was conducted through a long, dark passage into an immense hall draped with black. He was able to see by the faint light of sepulchral lamps corpses in their shrouds. The altar, built of human skeletons, stood in the center. Ghostly forms moved through the hall, leaving behind them a foul odor. At length 2 men dressed as specters appeared and tied a pink band of ribbon smeared with blood around his forehead. Upon this was an image of the Lady of Loretto. A crucifix was placed in his hand, and an amulet hung around his neck. His clothes were removed and laid upon a funeral pyre in a fireplace, while upon his body crosses were smeared in blood. Then his pedunta were tied with string, that's his genitals. Now 5 horrid and frightening figures, blood-stained and mumbling, approached him and threw themselves down in prayer. After an hour, sounds of weeping were heard. The funeral pyre started to burn, and his clothes were consumed. From the flames of this fire a huge and almost transparent form arose, while the 5 prostrate figures went into terrible convulsions. Now came the voice of an invisible hierophant, booming from somewhere below as George Bush lay in a coffin naked. The words were those of these oaths which the candidate had to repeat. Quote, "In the name of the crucified one, I swear to sever all bonds which unite me with mother, brothers, sisters, wife, relatives, friends, mistress, kings, superiors, benefactors, or any other man to whom I have promised faith, service, or obedience. I name the place in which I was born. Henceforth I live in another dimension, which I will not reach until I have renounced the evil globe which has been cursed by heaven. From now onwards I shall reveal to my new chief all that I have heard or found out, and I shall also seek out and observe things which might otherwise have escaped me. I honor the aqua tofana. It is a quick and essential medium of removing from the earth, through death or robbing them of their wits, of those who oppose truth, and those who try to take it from our hands. I shall avoid Spain, Naples, and all other accursed lands, and I shall avoid the temptation to betray what I now have heard. Lightning will not strike as rapidly as the dagger, which will reach me wherever I may be, should I betray my initiation." Unquote. Now a candelabrum bearing 7 black candles is placed before the candidate, and also a bowl containing what is supposed to be human blood. He washes himself in the blood and drinks a quantity of it. The string around his genitalia is removed. He is placed in a bath to undergo complete ablution. After this, he eats a meal composed of vegetables. At this time, he is given his new name, by which he will be known to all of the others in the order, the Brotherhood of Death. And with the completion of his initiation, George Bush joined all of the male members of his family in a long line of ancestry, traced from Robert Roos to the modern day. He took his place in the order, the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, and has worked diligently to fulfill his role in the completion of the plan, the great work, the formation of the new world order, the one-world totalitarian socialist state, the destruction of all existing nation-states, all existing religions, and enslavement of the mob. The very highest degrees of the order show that the rationalism and materialism of the thinkers who developed it were determined to stamp out belief in religion. God and any faith in a deity, the initiate was told, were human inventions and had no real meaning. Subsequently, this was developed further, and the member who arrived at the highest position, that of Rex or king, learned that he was now equal to a king, and that all men were capable of equal advancement. Hence the need for kings over ordinary mortals was an illusion, and at the highest rank the title of Rex Mundi, or king of the world, is assumed. The 16th century saw the rise of a very powerful society, based upon a secret cult in the mountains of Afghanistan, the Roshaniya, or the Illuminated Ones. References to the existence of this mystical fraternity exist from the time of the House of Wisdom at Cairo several hundred years before. In fact, the Roshaniya are just a later emergence of the old cult of the Assassins. It seems likely that small branches were founded in various parts of the Near and Middle East, which would account for the special usage of the names of the 8 degrees of initiation among them. The earliest figure named in the history of the cult is one Bayezid Ansari of Afghanistan, whose family claimed descent from the Ansar, the helpers who assisted Muhammad after his flight from Mecca nearly 1400 years ago. As a reward for this service, he stated his ancestors had been granted initiation into the mysteries of the Ishmaelite religion, the secret inner training which dated from Abraham's rebuilding of the temple at Mecca, the mystical Haram, to the Assassins, through the Roshaniya, and into Europe via the Knights Templar. Bayezid's own father, however, was known to be as narrowly conventional as anyone in the country, and one account of the rapid rise of the sect has it that Bayezid, after a period of preparation for the normal priesthood, was converted to his strange doctrine by a missionary from the Ismailis, the sectarians holding a secret doctrine supposedly handed down in the family of the Prophet, who maintained hidden lodges throughout the world of Islam, and also claimed, after the Crusades, to have penetrated with their ideas even Spain, Germany, France, and parts of Britain. However this may be, the Illuminated Ones soon became more than a headache for the governors of Afghanistan, the Mughal rulers of India, and their Persian neighbors. Not far from Peshawar, which is now in the northwest of Pakistan, Bayezid set up a small school where he carefully coached those who had been initiated by him in the knowledge of the supernatural that he claimed. A period of probation was expected from each candidate, during which he would go into periods of concealment or meditation, known as kilawat, or silence. During this time, he was to receive the illumination, which was emanated from the Supreme Being, who desired a class of perfect men and women to carry out the organization and direction of the world. Bayezid collected in this way, over a period of 3 years, about 50 staunch disciples, whom he had trained in obedience, and to whom, so we are told, he had shown a way whereby they could liberate their inner powers. Well, this meant that they were ready to follow his further instructions. These orders, according to what his opponents say, were that the whole sect would now become bandits, to prey upon the rest of the world, and all those who could not identify themselves by their secret sign were their legal and lawful prey. Little information is available from the other side, but 3 letters said to have been written from one branch to another contain in outline a plan to reshape the entire social system of the world, first taking control of individual countries one by one. And where have we heard that before? We've heard it from every one of the histories of all of these different sects of Mystery Babylon, which on the outward appearance seem to be different from each other. On the esoteric level, are one and the same religion, with one and the same plan, with one and the same goal, all working toward that end. And the end always justifies the means. Now something does survive of the degrees of initiation. The first was Salik, or seeker, followed by Murid, disciple, Fakir, humble devotee, Arif, enlightened one, Khwaja, master, Emir, commander, Imam, priest, and Malik, chief or king. This succession does not follow the usual pattern of promotion in the Muslim mystical secret societies, the tariqas, and seems to have been specially devised for this one. In the first 3 degrees, the candidate perfected himself by repetitions of certain phrases which were believed to carry power. Examples are these: Rabba, Afrina'a, Heya, Hafida, Khawaya. Of these words, all Arabic or Persian. The first stands for the concept of lordship, the second for creation, the third for life, the fourth for protection, and the last for absolute power. If they were repeated with deep meditation upon various forms of their manifestations in human life, it was believed the appropriate power would come into the devotee. Now, no special deity was worshipped, but it was believed that there was a supreme overall power, which was known by the sum of its individual powers, lordship, protection, and so on, a type of pantheism which works its way into the modern mystical societies of today. And that when one had meditated upon them all, and they had become the property of the invocant, he would thenceforward be a man of complete power. Now, folks, this kind of idea underlies a good deal of religious and magical thinking in many faiths, though it is seldom put in as concise a manner. The enlightened one of the 4th degree was he who could attain, during the rituals, complete identification with this overall power, and was guided by it in all that he did. It was said that he could communicate directly with the unknown or hidden supervisors. Now this meant that, apart from the guidance of the chief, he was free to suit his own pleasure in life. No theological or social bonds limited him. It is at this stage, said the illuminated, that the Arif could perform acts of wonder and magic, influence the physical world, and know the secrets of others. He attained this degree through the acceptance of him by the master, to whom he had confided his dreams and mystical ecstasies. The master alone really knew whether these were true or false experiences, and promoted him accordingly. Some people proceeded to the higher degrees without going through all the lower ones, because they were helped by the spirits of former illuminates who had died. The master, emir, imam, and malik degrees were reserved for the very highest men and women initiates. After the 5th degree, the segregation of the sexes in rituals was no longer practiced. Anyone of the degree of imam and higher could start his own lodge and make his own disciples. Bayezid decided to move his headquarters into the most inaccessible mountains of Afghanistan, where he set up a large and luxurious castle, and from which he directed his military and bandit operations designed to overcome the rest of the East. His missionaries were sent far and wide, but received little official support. The cult did, however, spread among merchants and soldiers who thought that this gateway to mystical experiences was something to enter. They contributed lavishly to the chief's upkeep and his most expensive military, political, and espionage system. The heady wine of this success seems to have affected the prudence of the head illuminate more strongly than it should, for his claims became more and more extreme in public, as most usually do. There was, he now preached, no afterlife of the kind currently believed in, no reward or punishment, only a spirit state which was completely different from earthly life. The spirits, if they belonged to the order, could continue to enjoy themselves and be earthly powers, acting through living members, but that was all. The preaching of this spiritual vampirism seemed to delight his followers as much as it infuriated his enemies, because Bayezid now gave out more and more of the new doctrine based upon his no afterlife creed. Eat, drink, be merry, gain power, look after yourself. You have no allegiance except to the order, he told them, and all humanity which cannot identify itself by our secret sign is our lawful prey. The secret signal was to pass a hand over the forehead, palm inwards, the countersign to hold the ear with the fingers and support the elbow in the cupped other hand. And you can see that sign be exchanged even today in the courts of law all over the United States of America between lawyers and judges, defendants and judges, prosecutors and judges, prosecutors and defending lawyers, etc., etc., etc. Bayezid took to himself the style of Pir Aroshan, or Sage of Illumination, and founded a city at Hashnagar, which was to be the center from which Illuminism was to spread all over the world. Now, each member of his following was given a new name upon entry. Does that sound familiar? And this name depended upon the guild to which he in theory belonged. According to Bayezid, all humanity was divided into professions. His were lamp makers. Some members were the makers, others sold lamps. Some were known as this kind of lamp, some another. Lamp of the darkness was a typical example. Among the other guilds noted are those of the builders. Does that sound familiar? Soldiers, merchants of various kinds, and scribes. They can be found today in organizations such as the American Medical Association or the American Bar Association, etc., etc. Writing in the 19th century, an Afghan scholar who was by no means fond of the Society of the Roshaniya claimed that they were, in fact, an organization devoted to fighting against the tyranny of the Moguls, and that the banditry and strange doctrines attributed to them were untrue, allegations by interested parties. He based this upon two manuscript copies of the objectives of the order, which seem to have stated that it was dedicated to influencing people of importance throughout the East and West towards greater justice and self-training into the immense capacities of the human mind, whereby wonders can be caused, and through which the harmony of the world will be established. Now, these ideas are taken from those enshrined in our ancient literature and practices, as well as those of the Persians, many of whom followed the true illuminated path before the new message was revealed, they stated. In the end, the imperial Mogul decided that something must be done about the widespread power of the militant mystics of the Hindu Kush mountains. The governor of Kabul arrested Bayezid, clapped him in irons, and paraded him through the streets to show that here was no supernatural being. To give further point to the proceedings, his hair and beard were half-shaved, but this governor, Moshin Khan, was under the ascendancy of his religious guide, one Sheikh Atari, who may even have been a secret adherent of the Illuminated One, for the cult was spreading with rapidity. In any case, he told the governor that Bayezid was undoubtedly a man of great and holy attainments, and that considerable suffering would inevitably attend anyone who treated this man harshly. Bayezid was allowed to escape. The indignities to which he had been subjected kindled his Illuminism still higher. Calling his numerous companions, he retired to tribal Tehra, where he set up a military and court atmosphere which is still remembered for its glamour, fervor, and mystery. India and Persia were to be overcome by force of arms, he announced. To that end, many more were to be enrolled into the ranks of the illuminated. Enthusiastic scenes throughout Afghanistan resulted from the proclamation, which was carried far and wide to the accompaniment of kettle drums and wild sword dances. And when he was ready, Bayezid, attended by his halqa, or circle of dervishes, led the campaign into the lush land of India. Intercepted by the Moshin Khan, whom he had earlier escaped, he was wounded, put to flight, and he eventually died as a result of this encounter. His son, Omar Ansari, proclaimed himself leader, and immediately ordered an attack upon the Pathan tribe of the Yusufzai, who had allied themselves with the Mughal. He was killed by the hillman, and his own son, quote, the servant of the one, unquote, took over the leadership. And by the middle of the 17th century, this youth had been killed defending his castle against a Mughal expeditionary force. His infant son escaped with some of his followers into Afghanistan proper, where the cult was restarted. The descendants of this Abdul Qidar, servant of the powerful, continued to rule the fanatics and to send their teachers far and wide. The creed eventually split into two divisions, the military and the religious, and nowadays it is only the followers of the latter who survive, still a secret cult which might, given the right conditions, have touched off a movement as important as that of the assassins. Now, 40 years after the last religio-military leader of the Afghan illuminated ones died, a society of the same name, the Illuminati, came into being in Germany, formed, it is said, by Adam Weishaupt. The young Jesuit priest, a professor of canon law at the Jesuit Ingolstadt University. Coincidences of date and beliefs connect these Bavarian Illuminati with the Afghan ones, and also with the other cults which called themselves illuminated. In actual fact, they are all the same. The beginning of the 17th century saw the foundation of the illuminated ones of Spain, the Alumbrados, condemned in an edict of the Grand Inquisition in 1623, out of which the condemned Ignatius Loyola emerged as a man immune to prosecution, arrest, or accusation from any king, prince, or prelate, as the head of one of the most powerful secret societies ever organized, the Society of Jesus, now known as the Jesuits. Ignatius Loyola had been the leader of the Alumbrados in Spain, and it was his sect, the illuminated ones, or the Alumbrados, which became the Society of Jesus. In 1654, the illuminated Guernets came into public notice in France. Now, documents still extant show several points of resemblance between the German and Central Asian Illuminists, points which are hard to account for on the grounds of pure coincidence, and yet which still might, one supposes, be nothing more than that. The Prophet Muhammad, for example, is claimed as an initiate by the Western Illuminati. Their calendar is the very same which survived in current usage in the former Iranian territories among the Afghans of the time. New Year's Day with them was the same day as the Persian and Afghan Newroz festival. Further, the degrees of initiation, although seemingly artificial ones, coupled with some of the degrees of Freemasonry, were also 8. And there are parallels in the naming of the individual degrees. Like the Roshaniya, the Illuminati stated that they had the objective of gaining important converts for the purpose of improving the state of the world. A comparison of the degrees shows the similarity. In the Roshaniya, the seeker, and in the Illuminati, the apprentice. In the Roshaniya, the disciple; in the Illuminati, the fellow craft. In the Roshaniya, the devotee; in the Illuminati, the master. In the Roshaniya, the enlightened one; in the Illuminati, the Illuminatus major. In the Roshaniya, the master; in the Illuminati, the Illuminatus dirigens. In the Roshaniya, the commander or emir; and in the Illuminati, prince. In the Roshaniya, priest; in the Illuminati, priest, and the Roshaniya, king or chief, in the Illuminati, king. Now, the early stages of initiation were designed to admit people into the brotherhood, to test them for reliability, and possibly to train them for responsible tasks connected with the greater diffusion of knowledge. Even in higher degrees, it seems that tests are also applied. Those who were to become priests, for example, were taken to a secret place where a throne stood, with before it the choice of priestly or royal regalia. The aspirant had to make the choice. Those who opted for the symbols of worldly power were dismissed promptly, but candidates taking up the sacred vestments were saluted with the phrase, "Hail, O Holy One." The members of this degree were considered teachers in whose hands was the training of disciples. Priests identified themselves with a secret sign. Both hands crossed were placed flat upon the head. In shaking hands, the priest extended his palm with the thumb held vertically upwards. The countersign was a fist with the thumb enclosed within it. Princes were those who could influence events at a very high level, either in academic or political affairs. The room in which the initiation to this high and secret degree was celebrated was hung with red. The garments which the prince was to wear were red and white. Now these are, of course, the colors of the Ishmaelis as well. In the ritual, the candidate is presented as a slave and states that he wants to liberate society from tyranny. The sign of the degree was the extending of both arms. As the countersign, before taking the hand of another, the prince gripped both his elbows. In 1786, a raid upon the house of an influential lawyer, Zwack, revealed secret papers connected with the order, and it is through those that many of the inner workings of the organization became known. Men were to be influenced through their women folk, and a large-scale plan for initiating women members was at an advanced stage of development. It has been widely claimed and touted that many of the charges which were made against the German Illuminati were false, and that the possession of instructions, for instance, on forging seals, was due to the fact that the lawyer Zwack had a collection devoted to that subject, as a matter of legal interest to him. It is also said that the project of enrolling women and young girls had in actual fact been taken from the aims of a very different society, the Mopses. While this matter still remains open, however, one may as well examine some of the documents which are stated to have belonged to the society. Zwack had written in his own hand a document describing the manufacture of a strong box which would blow up if it were tampered with. He also had a collection of impressions of the seals of several hundred important persons, and the already mentioned data on how to forge or substitute them. These, he stated in a letter of protest, were a part of the exhibits of his criminological collection. The famous memorandum detailing the plan to win over women to the cause comes from papers seized at the home of Baron Bassus, one of the members. The document states that women are the best means of influencing men. They should be enrolled, and into their minds put a hope that they might themselves in time be released from the tyranny of public opinion. Another letter asks how young women can be influenced, since their mothers would not consent to their being placed under the Illuminati for instruction. 5 women were suggested by one member as a start. They were 4 stepdaughters of one of the Illuminati, who were to be placed in the care of the wife of yet another illuminated one. They, in their turn, would enlarge the society through their friends. It was further mentioned that women are not considered to be really suitable for such an undertaking, because they are, quote, fickle and impatient, unquote. But the order was most sorely hit by the fact that something quite discreditable to the character of the founder was discovered, and it was thought that he might be trying to use the organization for personal reasons. Now, the establishment version goes something like this. Weishaupt, upon the suppression of the order, refused a pension which he was offered after he had been dismissed from his professorial chair. He attributed his downfall to the machinations of the Jesuits, whom he hated, and who had opposed him, as he was not of their number, whereas they considered the university post which he held to be a long-standing prerogative of their own. And nothing could be farther from the truth, for Adam Weishaupt was himself a Jesuit priest, holding a professorial chair at a Jesuit university. Now he and Zwack were both banished, and little is heard of them thereafter, although there are rumors that they carried on the society respectively in Saxe-Coburg in the Netherlands. Another incident that you will not hear in establishment accounts is the story of the messenger riding from one Bavarian Illuminati lodge to another, who was literally struck by lightning, divine intervention if you will, struck dead from his horse, and his pouch carrying the papers of a secret plan to take over individual nations and ultimately the world, were put into the hands of the Bavarian government. And many of the portions of these papers are almost word for word what later became known as the Protocols of the Wise Men. Illuminism had spread to France, however, some years before its suppression in Germany. Influential personages were members, many drawn from the ranks of the important Freemasons of Paris. As in the case of the German branch, it was soon alleged that they pursued terrible aims and practiced frightful orgies. An extract from a French book of the 1790s, La Secte des Illuminés, will give a fair idea of this. The huge chateau of Ermenonville near Paris was one of the chief lodges of the Illuminated. It belonged to the Marquis of Girardin, who protected Rousseau and later gave him a tomb on his estate. Saint Germain, the notable impostor, presided over it. He claimed to be 1,000 years old and to be able to make gold. He was said to be immortal, but strangely died in 1784. And even today, some Looney Tune wackos claim that they converse with Saint Germain, who's still alive, walking around in a modern-day suit and tie. Well, on the day of his initiation at the chateau of Ermenonville, the candidate was conducted through a long, dark passage into an immense hall draped with black. There were faint lamps set around the room. There were men dressed as corpses in shrouds. There was an altar of human skeletons which stood in the center of a large hall, and in the darkness, in the flickering low lamplight, the priest conducting the initiation resembled ghostly forms moving through the hall, and everywhere there was the stench of some terrible odor. Two men dressed as specters always appeared and tied a pink band or ribbon, which was smeared with blood, around the forehead of the candidate. Upon this was an image of the Lady of Loretto. Does this sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? A crucifix was placed in his hand, and an amulet hung around his neck. He was asked to remove his clothes, and if he showed any hesitancy, his clothes were removed for him and laid upon a funeral pyre. Crosses of blood were smeared upon his body, and then his genitalia were tied with a ribbon or with string. Then frightening figures, covered with blood and mumbling strange incantations, approached and threw themselves down in prayer. After a long period of time, weeping, crying, wailing broke out as if a herd, a plethora of mourners were bereaved upon the death of their closest and deepest love. The funeral pyre burned brighter and brighter. All of the clothes of the initiate were consumed, and from behind or near this fire One of the priests emerged almost as if he had taken form from the smoke of the pyre itself. And the 5 figures went into convulsions, and loud wailing and screaming took place. And then came the voice of someone concealed behind a curtain. These oaths which the candidate had to repeat. Quote, "In the name of the crucified one, I swear to sever all bonds which unite me with mother, brothers, sisters, wife, relatives, friends, mistress, kings, superiors, benefactors, or any other man to whom I have promised faith, service, or obedience." Quote, "I name the place in which I was born. Henceforth I live in another dimension, which I will not reach until I have renounced the evil globe which has been cursed by heaven. From now onwards I shall reveal to my new chief all that I have heard or found out, and I shall also seek out and observe things which might otherwise have escaped me. I honor the aqua tofana. It is a quick and essential medium of removing from the earth, through death or robbing them of their wits, of those who oppose truth and those who try to take it from our hands. I shall avoid Spain, Naples, and all other accursed lands, and I shall avoid the temptation to betray what I have now heard. Lightning will not strike as rapidly as the dagger, which will reach me wherever I may be, should I betray my initiation." Unquote. Then a 7-branched candelabrum bearing 7 black candles was placed before the candidate, and a large bowl containing human blood. The candidate washed himself in the blood and drank a quantity of it. The string around his genitalia was removed, and then he was carried to a bath to undergo complete ablution. After this, he was given a meal composed of root vegetables. Now, folks, while it is possible that such ceremonies as this have actually taken place, and we know that they have, because it is the exact ceremony that George Bush underwent in the crypt, or what is known as the tomb, the Skull and Bones, at Yale University. But it will be recalled that such items as human blood are generally not of the genuine variety in any society other than those reputed to be dedicated to criminal or perverted ends. Well, I have this to say: no one knows but those who actually take part in the ceremony, whether it's chicken blood or human blood or pig blood or cow's blood. And as with the initiations of other societies, there is no doubt that the candidate may have been made to believe that he was actually going through an initiation which involved horrible things of this nature, such as human blood. Initiation into the ancient mysteries was often accompanied by the exposure of the candidate to fear and other emotions in order to make him receptive to the oath or message which was to be made manifest. It has been said, folks, that the European version of the Order of the Illuminati contributed in no small measure to the development of revolutionary doctrines which eventually culminated in the Russian and other communist machines. And in fact, for those of serious study who have perused the depths of the available material, as I and others have no doubt whatsoever that communism, international socialism, is the direct product of the mystery schools of the Illuminati, as was the formation of this nation, which was guaranteed to lead us in to what is known as the New World Order, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the formation of a one-world totalitarian state ruled by benevolent despotism, is the way that they put it. And there is little doubt that the order was dedicated to the overcoming of princely power, as it was then known, and to the diffusion of anti-religious ideas. And this can best be seen by examining the development of the teaching of the member as he progressed from one degree of initiation into the next. Now, folks, many young enthusiasts with a taste for mystery and a desire to fight oppression in any form were drawn through a deliberate plan from the ranks of all of the colleges and universities and from all of the other supposedly benevolent fraternal organizations. After an oath of obedience and silence had been extracted from the candidate, he was then handed over to a director or teacher, or, if you will, hierophant, to be taught that the order was one of discipline and effort, and that the final objectives were to do good through leaving aside all preconceived notions, and upon the basis of free thought, to lead mankind to salvation. But salvation granted by who? And salvation from what? That is the question that intelligent men should be asking. However, it's been my experience that most men and most women don't ask any questions whatsoever, or very few anyway. Those who managed to show that they were likely to accept the next stage in teaching were advanced to the rank in which he was made to swear that he would work under the orders of his masters without doubt or question. He would not use his critical faculties in any way, in any matter connected with such instructions. Now, in the lower ranks are the nursery for all you Blue Lodge Master Masons out there who think you know so much and are nothing more than the greatest group of followers ever conceived and let loose upon humanity. Yes, in the nursery, the member was very much in the dark as to the way in which the order was run and how it should accomplish its design of freeing the world. As he progressed, however, he found that a part of his service to the society was to gain financial and social power, and to place them at the disposal of the group. Indeed, he was expected to be a diligent Mason, and to try to gain control over Freemason funds. It was not until the 10th rite of promotion had been completed that the member was given, with the grade of priest, certain definite knowledge. And now today, in the order known as the Scottish Rite, this information is not given until the candidate actually reaches the 30th degree, according to the actual writings of the man who was the Grand Commander of all Freemasonry of the world and of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in the United States, Mr. Pike, General Pike. Well, this knowledge included the fact that the Illuminati were proposing to destroy princes and prelates throughout the world, and were to remove forever the feeling of local nationality from the minds of men. Another goal was to destroy all existing religions. The ways in which this was to be done involved infiltrating high positions in education, administration of government, the military, and, of course, the press. The very highest degrees showed that the rationalism and materialism of the thinkers who developed it were determined to stamp out all belief in religion, God, and any faith in a deity. The initiate was told were human inventions, and they had no meaning whatsoever. Now, this was developed further, and the member who arrived at the highest position in the order, or that designated as Rex or King, learned that he was now the same as any king, on the same level, with the same rights and the same divine right of rule, and that all men were capable of equal advancement. But all men were not equal. Hence the need for kings over man was an illusion perpetrated by those in power, and this perpetration was to be broken at all costs. And the highest, or the man who sat at the head of the council of hidden supervisors, made up of 9 members, was designated as Rex Mundi, or literally translated, King of the World. In their machinations to overthrow, topple the kings and queens of all of the countries of the world from their thrones, they established the United States of America in the English colonies in the New World, and its ultimate goal, its secret destiny, was to be the catalyst to bring into the world what they called the Great Society or the New World Order. And it certainly worked, dear listeners. As you can look back through history, the granting of the common man of liberty, fraternity, equality, freedom that he had never tasted or known before in history, lit the spark that then ignited the French Revolution, of course, with the leadership and the manipulation of the people of the Illuminati, the lodges of Freemasonry, the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, and others. At the highest level are all the same, with the same goals. And this spark of revolution spread throughout the world. And until we all grow up and learn how to stop this, it will continue. As the secret societies propel us, manipulate us, deceive us, lie, operating in secret, infiltrating everything decent and good that man has ever built, destroying it from within, bringing closer and closer their goal of what they believe to be a utopia on earth, a one-world, totalitarian, socialist order. They hope to create the world where they will rule, as being the ones who possess the only truly mature minds. They will establish a council of advisors to a world charismatic political and religious leader who will be the outward rule, but he will really take his orders from this benevolent despotism, this council of learned elders, and everyone on the face of this earth will be under total control for every 24-hour period of their lives. There will be one world religion catering to the needs of man, not man obeying the laws of any god. The general rule will be, as has been touted many, many times by these people, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And even murder will be considered to be a learning experience, provided that the perpetrator actually learns something. People who exhibit violent tendencies as a matter of normal behavior on their part will simply be eliminated. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this is beginning to come together and make sense to you. If it doesn't, as yet, we have a long, long way to go, as you have probably already begun to understand. Alice Bailey, folks, one of the key members of the New Age religion, wrote this. Quote, "There is no question, therefore, that the work to be done in familiarizing the general public with the nature of the mysteries is of paramount importance at this time. These mysteries will be restored to outer expression through the medium of the Church and the Masonic fraternity," unquote. And she's absolutely 100% correct. The question of just what the ancient mysteries were, folks, was answered in part by Albert G. Mackey, another 33rd degree Mason. He wrote a 2-volume work entitled Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and he wrote this under the subject of the ancient mysteries. Quote, each of the pagan gods had, besides the public and open, a secret worship paid to him, to which none were admitted but those who had been selected by preparatory ceremonies called initiation. This secret worship was termed the mysteries. Unquote. The student of the Masonic order can know that when Mr. Mackey writes, his writings can be relied upon. He is considered to be one of the premier Masonic authors of all time. These are the comments from the biographical information presented on Mr. Mackey in the front of his encyclopedia. Quote, his writings are universally esteemed for their sincerity, honest records, and common sense. He was a leader in research who valued accuracy. Unquote. Carl Cloudy, another Mason who writes on the subject of the Lodge, also has words of praise for Mr. Mackey. Quote, he was one of the greatest students and most widely followed authorities the Masonic world has ever known. Unquote. And in his book entitled Introduction to Freemasonry, he praised Mr. Mackey with these words. Quote, Albert Gallatin Mackey, one of the greatest students and most widely followed authorities the Masonic world has known. He is the great master of Freemasonry. Unquote. So Mr. Mackey certainly can be believed when he tells his readers that the worship of pagan gods had a secret, non-visible worship besides the public one. The reader can believe him when he identifies the name of this secret worship. He told his readers, quote, this secret worship was termed the mysteries. Unquote. Another who has written about the subject of the ancient mysteries was Manly P. Hall, another 33rd degree Mason whom I have quoted extensively before in this series. He has written in his book entitled, What the Ancient Wisdom Expects of Its Disciples. Quote, in the remote past, the gods walked with men, and they chose from among the sons of men the wisest and the truest. With these specially ordained and illumined sons, they left the keys of their great wisdom, which was the knowledge of good and evil. These illumined ones founded what we know as the ancient mysteries. Unquote. Now, in case you weren't listening there, this is a dead giveaway and an admission that the gods that walked with men were known, at least in the Bible, as Satan. For he says here, and I'm going to read this again for you folks, because I know some of you just didn't pick it up. Because I know how the minds of the sheeple operate. And there's a lot of sheeple listening. There's also a lot of people listening who aren't sheeple. And they know that I'm not talking to them. If the word sheeple applied to you makes you angry, then, folks, it is an indication that it fits you like a shoe, like a glove, that you are indeed one of the sheeple. Let me read it again. Quote, with these specially ordained and illumined sons, they left the keys of their great wisdom, which was the knowledge of good and evil. According to the Bible, the knowledge of good and evil was imparted to Adam when Satan enticed Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and she in turn enticed Adam. And what was the fruit of the tree of knowledge? It was the knowledge of good and evil. It was forbidden for man to know that. Now, I'm not making judgment on any of this. I'm just telling you what my research says. He wrote, and we're talking about Manly P. Hall, 33rd degree Freemason, he wrote additional comments about these mysteries in another of the books he has written called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And I would urge you, if you can afford it, to buy that book. It's a very expensive book. I have a copy of it in my library. It cost me $150, and it was worth every single penny of it, I can assure you. Quote, the arcana, defined as being a secret or hidden knowledge of the ancient mysteries, were never revealed to the profane, defined as those not initiated into the inner mysteries, except through the media of symbols. You're going to find, folks, that symbols mean more than you will ever begin to understand unless you've waded deep into the stream of the mystery Babylon, as I have. quote, symbolism fulfilled the dual office of concealing the sacred truths from the uninitiated and revealing to those qualified to understand the symbols, unquote. Mr. Hall dedicated the latter book to, quote, the proposition that concealed within the emblematic figures, allegories, and rituals of the ancients is a secret doctrine concerning the inner mysteries of life, which doctrine has been preserved in toto, which means in the whole, among a small band of initiated minds since the very beginning of the world, unquote. He went on to mention that the mysteries, quote, were secret societies, binding their initiates to inviolable secrecy and avenging with death the betrayal of their sacred trusts, unquote. And to this day they take blood oaths. Mr. Hall told the reader that no one is to know the identity of those who have received the secrets. In fact, he wrote, quote, the true adept and initiate shall reveal his identity to no man unless that one is worthy to receive it, unquote. He further explained where some of these initiates lived when he wrote, quote, no reasonable doubt can exist that the initiates of Greece, Egypt, and other ancient countries possessed the correct solutions to those great cultural, intellectual, moral, and social problems which in an unsolved state confront the humanity of the 20th century, unquote. He further amplified that thought when he added this, quote, Neoplatonism, defined by Mr. Hall as a school founded by Plotinus around 240 A.D., concerning itself with the problems of metaphysics, which he calls the study of knowledge, recognizes the existence of a secret and all-important doctrine which from the time of the earliest civilizations had been concealed within the rituals, symbols, and allegories of religions and philosophies, unquote. So, in summary, it is possible, folks, to understand what these ancient mysteries were. And there appears to be at least 4 truths gleaned from the information provided in the comments made previously, and these truths appear to be: 1. The ancient mysteries had 2 forms of worshiping the same God. 2. The knowledge of the true God was reserved for those who had been entrusted with the secrets, and not for those whom they call the profane. 3. Those who understood those secrets were sworn to the strictest secrecy. And 4. Those who had knowledge of the secrets claimed to possess all of the answers to all of the problems of mankind. Now, there was an additional secret for the secret bearers. They had to be initiated in a private initiation ceremony. Albert Pike, General Albert Pike, a Southern Confederate general during the Civil War, wrote this, quote, initiation was considered to be a mystical death, and the perfect epopt was then said to be regenerated, newborn, restored to a renovated existence of life, light, and purity, unquote. In fact, folks, this, quote, newborn, unquote, experience is similar to the experience the, quote, born-again, unquote, Christians go through. The Christians call their experience a second birth, just as the Masons do. In fact, Albert Pike calls a similar ceremony a, quote, born-again, unquote, experience, and he wrote this, quote, in the Indian mysteries, the 3rd degree, the initiate is said to be born again, unquote. The ceremony in the ancient mysteries has been described by the Masonic writer Manly P. Hall. Quote, in the ancient system of initiation, the truth seeker must pass through a second birth, and those who attained this exalted state were known thereafter as, quote, the twice-born, unquote. This new birth must be personally earned through a complete regeneration of character and conduct, unquote. This new birth ceremony involves a symbolic death, according to the Mason Kenneth Mackenzie, and he wrote this, quote, In the ancient mysteries, the aspirant could not participate in the highest secrets until he had been placed in the coffin. In this, he was symbolically said to die, and his resurrection was to the light, unquote. Now remember, I told you about the initiation that George Bush underwent in the crypt, also known as the tomb, the skull and bones, the Brotherhood of Death at Yale University. This is what they're talking about. During a press conference, a reporter asked George Bush if he was a Christian, and he replied thusly, quote, "If you're asking if I have been born again, the answer is yes," unquote. And indeed, he had. Modern-day Masons participate in an almost similar ceremony to the one described by these Masonic writers. In the third degree, called the Master Mason degree, inside the Blue Lodge, the candidate is actually knocked off of his feet by several of the Masons in attendance. He is wrapped up in a blanket and moved to the western end of the temple. There, after further ceremony, he is raised up by a grip called the Master's Grip, or the grip of the lion's paw. Those who learned the mysteries also learned that they had a secret project, one that was described by Albert Pike in his book entitled Morals and Dogma. Mr. Pike wrote this, quote, "Behold our object, the end, the result of the great speculations of antiquity, the ultimate annihilation of evil and restoration of man to his first estate by a Redeemer, a Messiah, a Christos, the incarnate Word, reason, or power of deity," unquote. I urge you all, if you can find a copy of Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, to purchase it, take it home, and read it. Mr. Hall told his readers that those who had been initiated into the mysteries were the secret power behind the governments of the past. He wrote this about these ancient initiates in his book entitled What the Ancient Wisdom Expects of Its Disciples. Quote, "They are the invisible powers behind the thrones of earth, and men are but marionettes dancing while the invisible ones pull the strings. We see the dancer, but the master mind that does the work remains concealed by the cloak of silence," unquote. Remember, I told you folks that if you don't open your mind, and if you don't quit believing dogma, if you don't quit believing what people tell you, if you don't stop believing what Dan Rather tells you on the 6 o'clock news, or your local minister down at your church, or your mother, or the President of the United States, and if you don't start digging to find the truth yourself, you, the sheeple, are the marionettes dancing while the invisible ones pull the strings. And until you change that pattern of your life, you will always be the puppet on the end of someone else's string. And I know that that's not what you want to be, is it? Other writers, folks, have confirmed the thoughts of Mr. Hall. A Masonic scholar named George Steinmetz also acknowledged that these mysteries exist, and that some of the members inside the Masonic lodges are custodians of the secrets. He has written this in his book entitled Freemasonry, Its Hidden Meaning. Quote, "Ancient secret doctrine, which is concealed in Masonic allegory and symbolism. It was but to preserve these truths for future generations that Masonry was perpetuated," unquote. And if that is true, why is it a secret? Why not tell us all what this secret doctrine is? For modern man is not like ancient man when he didn't know how to read or reason or understand. Modern man has the capability to understand anything that is put before him and accept it if it is the truth and reject it if it is a lie. So why the secrecy? The secrecy is because, folks, the real secret of Mystery Babylon is how to control everyone else. And if they reveal these secrets, they won't have the control, for it'll be in the hands of everyone. That is the greatest secret of the secret societies. Another, writing of Manly P. Hall, was this, quote, "Much of the ritualism of Freemasonry is based upon the trials to which candidates were subjected by the ancient hierophants." Hierophant is defined as the high priest of the mysteries. "Before the keys of wisdom were enthroned to them," unquote. The ancient mysteries had a beginning. According to Mr. Mackey, he wrote about where they started. Quote, "The first of which are those of Isis and Osiris in Egypt. The most important of these mysteries were the Osiric in Egypt," unquote. Another writer, Edmund Ronayne, an ex-Mason, confirmed that the Masons were involved in the worship of Osiris when he wrote this in his book entitled The Master's Carpet. Quote, "Masonry's ceremonies, symbols, and the celebrated legend of Hiram in the Master Mason's degree were directly borrowed from the ancient mysteries or the secret worship of Baal, Osiris, or Tammuz," unquote. This is a direct admission that Freemasonry stems directly out of Mystery Babylon, the ancient mystery religion, the worship of Baal, the golden calf, representative of the house during which that 2,000-year period the sun resided. The sun, the symbol of the light, Lucifer, the intellect, the gift, primordial knowing. Albert Pike then detailed where the mysteries went after their beginnings in Egypt. He wrote this in Morals and Dogma. Quote, "From Egypt the mysteries went to Phoenicia and were celebrated at Tyre. Osiris changed his name and became Adonai, or Dionysus, still the representative of the sun. In Greece and Sicily, Osiris took the name of Bacchus. So the ancient mysteries conceal an important mystery kept secret from the average person. The mystics claim that this mystery has been concealed from the world for centuries. Even though they had taken the mystery to other continents, those who believed in this religion were yet to take it to America. That was yet to come, and we will get to that, I promise you. And it will, I also promise you, amaze you." Lafayette, who was a very famous and noted pirate and a member of Freemasonry and the Knights Templar, said this, quote, "An invisible hand is guiding the populace," unquote. Arthur Edward Waite, a prolific writer on secret societies, has written this, quote, "Beneath the broad tide of human history there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place upon the surface," unquote. Another who wrote about the power just underneath the surface was President Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States of America, who made this startling statement. He made this statement, yet it was ignored. But it should never go ignored from this point forward. Quote, "There is a power so organized, so subtle, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it," unquote. So these two writers have warned America that secret societies had been arranging the major events of the past, and President Wilson warned those who were quick to condemn these organizations that they had better be cautious. Albert Pike also connected the secret societies with a secret belief in his book entitled Morals and Dogma. He wrote that all secret orders and associations, quote, now remember, he says, all secret orders and associations, quote, had two doctrines, one concealed and reserved for the masters, the other public, unquote. Now, one such secret society with two doctrines was the Illuminati, and Professor Weishaupt, its founder, boasted of his organization's secrecy. He realized that this secrecy would enable them to decide the fate of nations, and because their deliberations were secret, no outsider could interfere. He wrote this, quote, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation," unquote. Weishaupt later wrote about that secrecy in a letter to a fellow member of the Illuminati. Quote, "Nothing can bring this about but hidden societies. Hidden schools of wisdom are the means which will one day free men from their bonds. Princes and nations shall vanish from the earth," unquote. Now, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was a member of this secret society. He was, in fact, a 33rd degree Freemason, and his great society that he envisioned was exactly what we're talking about here. And you can see that Johnson, a great socialist, a Marxist, secretly set us on the road to socialism by setting up this great welfare state, which he called the Great Society. It's one and the same, folks. It's the same. George Bush's New World Order is the same. The New World Order that our forefathers envisioned was the same. The Great Society talked about during the Peasants' Revolt in England was the same. The same that is coming unless we wake up to stop it. And you can see by the welfare state how well it really works. It doesn't work at all. It never will work. It can't work. These people are Looney Tunes. If you believe the exoteric version of what they intend to bring about. You see, they have no intention of bringing about a utopia, a heaven on earth, a great society. Not at all. That's to lure the unwary, the foolish, the great mass of followers that make up the lower degrees of this secret society, so that they will support the completion of the great work, the plan. They really intend this to be something along the lines of what Hitler attempted to establish. They talk about it in terms of a great cleansing, where certain religions, certain people, certain races will literally be eliminated from this earth. And they are convicted through their own words, ladies and gentlemen. The secret societies were created to bring the world to the new society known as the New World Order. The members of these organizations obviously feel that their goals are so noble that they may perform whatever tasks are required to bring them to that goal and that goal to fruition. This means, folks, that murder, plunder, and lying all become acceptable as long as these methods assist its members in obtaining their goal. But the Freemasons, or Freemasons as the true term began, want the world to know that they are not one of the societies involved in changing the world's civilization, and they're quick to rush to their own defense. However, when you go back and read their own history and their own words, you can see that they have literally no defense, for they are convicted by the words of their leaders, by the very words of their leaders, and, folks, by their deeds. For it was General Albert Pike who created, through the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. It was the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry that created the branch known as B'nai B'rith, which then created the ADL, or the Anti-Defamation League, which is nothing but an organization of criminals who have murdered, who have bombed, who have lied, and just recently one of their revealed crimes was spying, putting spies within the police organizations of the United States of America and spiriting out files and records. And all of the Jews in the United States support this criminal organization to their great shame. And those of you who feel that the Jews are responsible for all of this, you are wrong. Most Jews don't know any more about this than you did. And they are being used just as you are being used just as I have been used in my life. In all time, truth has been hidden under symbols, wrote Albert Pike. And he also wrote this: symbols are nevertheless ingenious veils that cover the truth. Now, Albert Pike was the sovereign Grand Commander of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Scottish Rite now controls world Freemasonry. There certainly seems, folks, to be a power in knowing something that you can't tell your family, friends, children, or business acquaintances. And Adam Weishaupt said it best with this selection from his writings, quote, "Of all the means I know to lead men, the most effectual is a concealed mystery," unquote. And that is true. I've found in my research that the vast fools, the followers, flock to the mysteries and the promise of learning some secret during their climb up the ladder of degrees of initiation. The truth is that only a very few ever learn anything, and what they learn is how to control the rest. The power of hidden symbols was alluded to by another writer, this time Foster Bailey, in his book entitled The Spirit of Freemasonry. Quote, "A symbol veils or hides a secret, and is that which veils certain mysterious forces. These energies, when released, can have a potent effect," unquote. And indeed they can, as we are all feeling now the pinch of the power. There are many who can attest to that simple truth. Organizations with concealed or secret initiation ceremonies abound in America and indeed around the world. College fraternities and sororities teach the college student to accept secret initiation ceremonies and hidden knowledge at a young age. The Masons, intended for adult males, have similar organizations for their young sons and daughters, and other secret organizations for their wives. And all of these organizations tend to prepare their male members for further service in the master secret organization, the Masons. However, the Masons are quick to point out that they conceal their truths from the general public. Manly P. Hall, for instance, wrote this, quote, "It is for the adepts. An adept is defined by the dictionary as one who is an expert, but there is an esoteric definition that shall be discussed later. Quote, "It is for the adepts, one to understand the meaning of the symbols," unquote. He further instructed his readers that understanding the symbols could make one wise. Quote, "An understanding of these symbols is the beginning of wisdom," unquote. Max Toth, a writer about the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, also wrote about the purpose of symbols, and he said, quote, "The knowledge of the ancient mysteries was never revealed to the layman except through the media of symbols. Symbolism fulfilled both the need to conceal sacred truths from the uninitiated and to offer a language for those qualified to understand it." Now, whatever these secrets are, folks, one writer on the subject feels it is time to make them public. Alice Bailey, one of the key writers supporting the New Age movement, wrote this, quote, "The hour for the ancient mysteries has arrived. These ancient mysteries were hidden in numbers, in ritual, in words, and in symbology. These veil the secret," unquote. Another writer who writes on the order, Carl H. Cloudy, told anyone who read the Masonic literature that he had best understand the language, or they would miss the true meaning of the words. He wrote, quote, "He who hears but the words of Freemasonry misses their meaning entirely," unquote. Rex Hutchins, a 32nd degree Mason who has written a book for the Masons, one so important that it was used to replace one written by Henry Clausen, a former sovereign commander, also informed his readers that his writings also concealed a secret. Quote, "The word reveal means to re-veil. That is, to give one explanation and yet continue to maintain the mystery of the symbol by not explaining it in a full and complete manner," unquote. So the language code must be broken if one is to learn the truth about the Masonic order. The reason that this is so is because the Masons have admitted that they have concealed the true meaning of some of their language. However, it is possible, folks, to know the true meanings of at least some of the hidden language, and the listener can be certain that the discovered interpretations are correct because the Masons themselves have revealed the hidden meanings of some of their symbols in some of their own literature. The secret societies, folks, that have concealed their purposes in hidden meanings, concealed writings, and private initiation ceremonies are admittedly very powerful. One who recognized that power was Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of England in the late 1880s, who said this in the House of Commons on July 14th in 1856. Quote, "There is in Italy a power which we seldom mention in this House. I mean the secret societies. It is useless to deny, because it is impossible to conceal, that a great part of Europe, the whole of Italy and France, and a great portion of Germany, to say nothing of other countries, is covered with a network of these secret societies. What are their objects? They do not want constitutional government. They want to change the tenure of the land, to drive out the present owners of the soil, and to put an end to ecclesiastical establishments," meaning religion, unquote. The Masons know about concealing secrets from the rest of the world. Carl Cloudy, a Masonic writer, told his readers that secrets are inside secrets, which are inside other secrets, and he wrote this, quote, "Cut through the outer shell and find a meaning. Cut through that meaning and find another. Under it, if you dig deep enough, you may find a third, a fourth. Who shall say how many teachings?" Unquote. And even the communists use concealment, for the communists were created by the mysteries. The cell system of the Communist Party was created by the mystery schools, which have used the same system for millennia. Nikolai Lenin, the Marxist communist who communized the Russian nation in the years following the Russian Revolution of 1917, wrote this, quote, "We have to use any ruse, dodge, trick, cunning, unlawful method, concealment, and veiling of the truth," unquote. Many of the signs for identifying a communist or a member of the Communist Party are exactly the same as those symbols and signs used by Freemasons to identify each other. The use of secrecy to conceal thoughts from certain of the members of an organization or from the public is the device of those who have something to hide. That something is so horrible, so terrible, that knowledge of that secret must be kept from those who would have the most to lose by knowledge of that secret. In the case of the secret societies, it is a belief in Lucifer, also known as Satan or the devil. In the case of communism, it is the truth that the people living in a communist nation know that the system does not work. But those in a non-communist nation targeted for a communist government are not to learn that simple truth. They are to be told that the system is the culmination of man's upward search for a perfect society, a great society, if you will, a utopia on earth, and they must be deluded into believing that there is no cost in the change from their current form of government to the communist form. One of the things that I find so incredible is that they trap the intellectuals so easily. The intellectuals, the ones who are supposedly so good at using their brain, cannot even use their brain so much as to look into history to see that the first people that the communists, the international socialists, destroy, kill, sentence to the labor camps, the gulag, if you will, are always the intellectuals. And history has recorded the brutality of the communists and the fact that millions of people have had to die as the communists installed that form of government. The evidence to support that condition will be discussed later in some other program. Now, secrecy is certainly not a part of the Christian religion today, although the Christian religion began in secret and was, in fact, a secret society. It is possible to know that nothing that Jesus said has been hidden from the Christians of today. He told the high priest in John, chapter 18, verse 20, quote, "And in secret have I said nothing," unquote. The intentional concealing of an organization's beliefs and purposes by the use of hidden language and concealed symbols is reserved primarily to the secret societies and the nationwide Masonic lodges, or indeed a secret society. And in the beginning, the Christians had their secret symbols also. One of the most prominent was the symbol of the fish. The secret is simply the fact that certain of their members worship Lucifer, and that they keep that secret from the overwhelming majority of their own members. And certainly the public is never to know this fact, if they can help it. And the evidence to support that conclusion is ample, but only to one who cares enough to look for it. The problem with most people is they don't care enough to look for anything except Wheel of Fortune on the television set. So the student of history has to discover the hidden meanings behind the symbols in the Masonic literature and in the secret initiation ceremonies to understand the Masonic order. One of the first symbols that needs to be examined is the symbol of the serpent, also called a snake or dragon. Manly P. Hall wrote that the use of this symbol is as old as early man when he wrote this in his book entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Quote, among nearly all these ancient peoples, the serpent was accepted as a symbol of wisdom, unquote, for it is from the serpent that man received the gift of intellect. Here Mr. Hall states that the serpent was a symbol of wisdom. It will be remembered that Lord Maitreya, the future New Age leader, also claimed to possess wisdom. Mr. Hall continued, quote, serpent worship in some form has permeated nearly all parts of the earth. The serpent is the symbol and prototype of the universal Savior who redeems the world by giving creation the knowledge of itself and the realization of good and evil, unquote, an admission that the serpent, at least from the point of view of the Christian Bible, is Satan. And then Mr. Hall links the serpent with the ancient mysteries previously discussed. He continues with the comment that the serpent was worshipped by the priests of that religion. Quote, the priests of the mysteries were symbolized as a serpent, sometimes called Hydra, unquote. And then he pointed out that the ancient mysteries have been passed on to various other cultures and that they have been brought forward to the present day. Manly P. Hall wrote this, quote, the serpent kings, and notice that Mr. Hall capitalized the two words as one would do for a deity or for royalty when he wrote this, reigned over the earth. The serpent kings reigned over the earth. It was these serpent kings who founded the mystery schools which later appeared as the Egyptian and Brahmin mysteries. The serpent was their symbol. They were the true sons of light, and from them have descended a long line of adepts and initiates duly tried and proven according to the law, unquote. And the proper term is not Freemason, it's Freemason. It comes from the French, from the Knights Templar, and it literally means the sons of light. Another writer, Wilfred Gregson, informed his readers why Mr. Hall capitalized the two words serpent kings when he wrote, quote, one symbol of great prominence throughout all ancient civilizations is the snake, or serpent, where it has symbolized divine wisdom, unquote. So Mr. Hall had reason to capitalize the words because he had discovered that the serpent represented divinity. Notice also, folks, that Mr. Gregson, even though he chose not to capitalize the words serpent, confirmed that Mr. Hall's use of the capital letter was correct when he stated that there was a connection between divine wisdom and the serpent. Mr. Hall, a 33rd degree Mason, made the same connection in these comments. Quote, the serpent is true to the principles of wisdom, for it tempts man to the knowledge of himself, unquote. A serpent is often used by the ancients to symbolize wisdom. The symbol of the serpent has another concealed truth, according to Kenneth Mackenzie, for he identified that truth in this quote when he described a brazen serpent. Quote, it was a type of mediator and a promise of redemption, unquote. The word brazen, folks, is defined as bold or impudent, and impudent is defined as shamelessly bold or disrespectful. Now you will remember that Lucifer was an anointed cherub in heaven who fell because he sought godly power. The story is covered in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14 of the Old Testament. Look it up. It says this, quote, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will be like the Most High, unquote. Therefore, it can be safely said that Lucifer would be considered to be shamelessly bold and, of course, disrespectful. It appears that the brazen serpent could be Lucifer. Another author, John Anthony West, wrote a book entitled Serpent in the Sky, in which he also connected the serpent with wisdom, and he wrote this, quote, "The serpent represents intellect, the faculty by which man discriminates. There is a higher and a lower intellect. Thus, symbolically, there is a serpent that crawls, and the higher intellect, that which allows man to know God, the heavenly serpent, the serpent in the sky." Unquote. The somewhat veiled worship of this serpent in the sky inside the Masonic lodges was alluded to by another Masonic writer, Kenneth Mackenzie. For in his book entitled The Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, he wrote this, quote, "Among the charges preferred against the Order of Knights Templar, for which Jacques de Molay suffered martyrdom, was that of worshipping an idol or image called Baphomet. It has been suggested that Baphomet is none other than the Ancient of Days or Creator. More cannot be said here without improperly revealing what we, meaning the Masons, are bound to heal, conceal, and never reveal." Unquote. So according to this Mason, the snake or serpent is somehow a symbol of the subject of the Masonic worship, and apparently this fact is the secret that the Masons cannot reveal to the rest of the world. A Christian minister, Reverend Alexander Hislop, wrote a book that included some discussion on the subject of serpent worship. And in that book, entitled Two Babylons, he explained that serpent worship was not something that is recent in time. It was an ancient practice. Quote, "Along with the sun, this symbol will be discussed later as the great fire god, and in due time identified with him, was the serpent worshipped. In the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. As the sun was the great enlightener of the physical world, so the serpent was held to have been the great enlightener of the spiritual by giving mankind the knowledge of good and evil." Unquote. And according to the Bible, you know who gave man the knowledge of good and evil? Satan, Lucifer. He then discussed a coin minted in Tyre, the center of the ancient Phoenician culture. This coin was also the subject of an article in the September 1986 issue of the Good News magazine. It depicted a serpent entwined around a tree stump. To the left of the stump stood an empty cornucopia, and to the right a flourishing palm tree. The snake on the coin is the symbol of the powerful god whom the Romans called Esculapius. The name means the man instructing snake, or the snake that instructs man, and the article then reported, quote, "In mythology, Aesculapius was believed to be the child of the sun, and thus the enlightener of mankind. As the legend goes, Aesculapius was ultimately struck down by a thunderbolt thrown by an angry Zeus, king of the gods, and cast into the underworld." Unquote. The tree stump, folks, represented the fallen god and his ruined kingdom. In the mythologies of many ancient civilizations, the image of a fallen tree was used to symbolize the cutting off of a great god or hero, someone cut off in the midst of their power. You see, the snake on the coin was shown twisting itself around the dead stump, exerting its power in an attempt to restore his fallen kingdom. The cornucopia is an ancient symbol of plenty, but it was empty on the coin. This has been interpreted as meaning that the abundance had been cut off because the great God has been cut off. However, folks, the implication is that the horn of plenty will return when the fallen god is restored to his rightful position. The palm tree shown in the coin is a well-known symbol of victory, so it appears that the coin was minted to depict the anticipated return of the fallen snake god to the world. And the Bible talks about a fallen serpent in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 9. However, in this case, folks, the snake is connected to another symbol of the serpent, a great dragon. Quote, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan." Unquote. Is the serpent worshipped in the ancient mysteries and a symbol in the Masonic ceremonies, a symbol of Satan, the devil? As has already been discussed, there is indeed evidence, folks, that this is the case. And once you have confronted the evidence and studied as much as I have studied, you will know that they are one and the same. Another symbol that needs to be analyzed is the star. On the page opposite page 124 in Mackey's Encyclopedia is a drawing illustrating the symbols of Freemasonry. Included in the 20 or so Masonic symbols is a drawing of a shooting star. Now, it can be fairly claimed that a blazing or shooting star would be one that was on the move inside the universe. One of the directions it could move would be, of course, towards the earth. If it was moving towards the earth, it could be called a falling star. But we know that most falling stars are actually meteors and not stars at all. Lucifer, however, is a fallen angel, according to Isaiah, an Old Testament prophet who wrote this in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. Quote, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer?" Unquote. Now, folks, notice that Isaiah also said that Lucifer fell from heaven, and other parts of the Bible report that he fell to the earth. So it is conceivable that the symbol of the falling or blazing star could be a symbol of Lucifer. A variety of authors have used their writings to discuss the star as a symbol. Professor Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, was one who explained what he considered the star to be a symbol of. Listen closely. Quote, "The flaming star is the torch of reason," unquote. Mr. Mackey wrote that the star, quote, "was a symbol of God," unquote. He then connected the blazing star to another symbol when he wrote, quote, "The blazing star refers us to the sun," unquote. And then he connected it with the secret initiation ceremonies inside the Masonic Lodge. Quote, "In the fourth degree of the same rite, the Scottish rite of Freemasonry, the blazing star is again said to be a symbol of the light of divine providence pointing out the way of truth," unquote. And Mr. Hutchins, the Masonic writer who has authored the recent book on Masonry, further interpreted the symbol of the star thusly. Quote, "The star as a type of the myriad suns that light other countless systems of worlds is an emblem of that Masonic light in search of which every Mason travels, the correct knowledge of the deity and of his laws that control the universe," unquote. Now, closely allied with the symbol of the star is the symbol of the sun. Albert Pike identified it with the worship of the past in this collection of quotes from his writings, and pay close attention. Quote, "The worship of the sun became the basis of all the religions of antiquity," unquote. Quote, "Thousands of years ago, men worshipped the sun. Originally, they looked beyond the orb to the invisible God. They personified him as Brahma, Amun, Osiris, Baal, Adonis, Malkarth, Mithras, and Apollo. Krishna is the Hindu sun god," unquote. Quote, "The Gauls worshipped the sun under the name of Belin or Belinus," unquote. Quote, "The sun is the ancient symbol of the life-giving and generative power of the deity. The sun was his manifestation and visible image," unquote. Quote, The sun is the hieroglyphical sign of truth because it is the source of light, unquote. So Mr. Pike identified the sun as a symbol of a deity that should be worshipped. He chose to capitalize the first letter in the word, the S, as one would in recognizing the name of a deity. And if you've been listening to this series, you already know that, of course, it was. Albert Mackey repeated Mr. Pike's contentions with comments like these about sun worship. Quote, "It was the oldest and by far the most prevalent of all the ancient religions. Eusebius says that the Phoenicians and the Egyptians were the first who ascribed divinity to the sun. Hardly any of the symbols of Masonry are more important in their signification or more extensive in their application than the sun as the source of material light. It minds the Mason of that intellectual light of which he is in constant search." The sun is then presented to us in Masonry, first as a symbol of light, but then more emphatically as a symbol of sovereign authority. Unquote. So, folks, the sun was a symbol of something that only the believers in the religion known as the ancient mysteries understood. These believers, called adepts, certainly knew that the people would not accept their mystery religion, so they had to conceal it from them. So the task became one of creating a religion around a belief that they knew the people would accept because it would make some sense, at least as far as the adepts would explain it. But their basic purpose was to create a popular religion as a cover for their secret worship. The secret religion would be built around a belief in the sun. The sun would be a perfect thing to build a religion around because of its basic nature. It is very visible and has a very important role in man's life. It rises in the morning, it appears to be born and then sets during the evening. It appears to die and then appears to be born again the next morning. It also appears to wander in the sky, setting further north or south each night. It then returns back to any given position twice each year. So the sun appears to have a major birth or death twice each day and twice each year. It would, of course, be very easy for the adepts to explain to the people that only something bigger than mankind, a god, had the ability to die and come back to life. So the adepts would teach the people that they had to pray to the god, or it would choose not to return. They encouraged a worship of the sun so that it would return to mankind again either once a day or once every 6 months. Albert Pike confirmed this view with this explanation of why early man worshipped the sun. Quote, "To them," meaning early man, "the journeyings of the sun were voluntary and not mechanical." Unquote. So early man considered the sun to be something that moved voluntarily. In other words, the sun did not have to return each morning. Man must have quickly determined that since the sun did not have to return, man should start asking it to return. For man certainly depended upon the sun for his life. Man certainly must have figured out just how important the sun was to his life and well-being, and he certainly must have determined that if the sun chose not to return, all of mankind would certainly perish. So it was an easy jump from a belief that the necessary sun was an entity that chose to move across the daytime sky to a belief that it would return only if man prayed to it to return. But folks, there's something even more interesting to be considered that Pike didn't explain with that comment. Obviously, to make the new religion work, the believers would have to be able to predict the movements of the sun. It wouldn't be too long before some of the common people would start noticing that the sun was neither an actual being nor a god to be worshipped, but something that moved according to precise laws. Now, if the common people figured that out, they would not need the adepts who had computed the sun's periodic cycles. So, to keep their power intact, they would teach the people that if they did not accommodate their wishes, they would make certain that the sun did not return. They could even predict, as their measurements became more sophisticated, the exact time and date when the moon would go between the sun and the earth, causing the sun to disappear. They could then fool the people into believing that they were the cause of the disappearance. They could then, of course, explain to the people that if they did not continue to pay them sort of tribute, they would not intercede in their behalf, and the sun would not reappear. To keep the minds of the common people, the sheeple, away from figuring out that the whole religion was a scam, the adepts would conduct beautiful and ornate ceremonies around the worship of the sun, and they would expect the people to pay them for the elaborate rituals. And to make their rituals valid, the adepts would always claim that the sun obeyed their prayers, thereby convincing the people of their need to keep the adepts around. The sheeple, would continue to pay tribute to these adepts as long as they appeared to be successful. Now, folks, if the adepts knew that the sun was a symbol of something that the people would not support, such as a belief that Lucifer, the devil, was the god that they worshipped, they would have to continue with their charade so that the people would not decide to stop worshiping. Because if the sheeple figured it out, they would no longer support their activities. They would have to keep their beliefs from the people and conceal their secret worship in hidden symbols. So sun worship as a religion prospered. Mr. Hutchins discussed that position in his book, and I also discussed it in mine, Behold a Pale Horse. Mr. Hutchins says this, quote, "In the tabernacle, the brethren, clothed in black, mourn Osiris, who is representative of the sun, of light, of life, of good and beauty. They reflect upon the way the earth may again be gladdened by his presence," unquote. Mr. Pike connected the sun to Osiris, mentioned by Mr. Hutchins as worthy of being mourned. Quote, "The three lights at the altar inside the Masonic temple represent Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Osiris was represented by the sun," unquote. Mr. Mackey went a little further and informed his readers that, quote, "Osiris was the sun," unquote. In his book entitled Introduction to Freemasonry, Carl H. Cloudy, the author, himself a Mason, connected the sun worship with the ceremonies inside the Masonic Lodge. Quote, "The lodge sets him," meaning the initiate, "upon the path that leads to light, but it is for him to travel the winding path to the symbolic east," unquote. The physical sun rises in the east, and the Masons explain that their search for light begins in the east. And notice that Mr. Cloudy capitalizes the word east, apparently in reverence to the spot where they believe that this god resides. The Masons tell the world that they circumambulate, defined as walking around, the temple floor during their initiation ceremonies. Mr. Cloudy explains why this rite is performed. Quote, "When the candidate first circles the lodge room about the altar, he walks step by step with 1,000 shades of men who have thus worshipped the Most High by humble imitation. Thus thought of circumambulation is no longer a mere parade, but a ceremony of significance, linking all who take part in it with the spiritual aspirations of a dim and distant past," unquote. And it is a historical fact that the Knights Templar also performed the circumambulation of their temples. And he further instructs his readers as to why this ceremony is part of their ceremony. Quote, "Early man circled altars on which burned the fire which was his god, from east to west by way of the south. Notice that the north is not included in the ceremony. The significance of that omission will be discussed later. But circumambulation became a part of all religious observances," unquote. In another part of his book, entitled Introduction to Freemasonry, Mr. Cloudy reported that this style of walking was traceable to the ancient religions of the past. And he wrote this, quote, "Circumambulation was the ceremonies of ancient Egypt," unquote. So this practice of the modern Masons is based upon the ancient pagan religious practices of the ancients. So the Masons are telling us that early man walked around in a circle because he was worshiping the sun. Then they tell us that they are doing it for the same reason. There are reasons that the north as a location to be visited in their walk around the temple floor is not included in their initiation rites, and 6 of the great Masonic writers have told us why this is so. Captain William Morgan offered his readers this explanation with this comment from his book, the writing of which he was murdered for. Quote, "We therefore Masonically term the North a place of darkness," unquote. Mr. Mackey confirmed that statement in his book. Quote, "The North is Masonically called a place of darkness." And Mr. Pike confirmed the comments made by the other 2 Masons with this declaration. Quote, "To all Masons, the North has immediately been the place of darkness, and of the great lights of the lodge, none is in the North," unquote. And Kenneth Mackenzie added his confirming thoughts. Quote, "The North was always esteemed a place of darkness," unquote. Mr. Hutchins became the 5th Masonic writer to confirm this detail, as he said this, quote, "As in other degrees, the closing ritual provides a summary of the lessons taught in the degree. We hear in the West the eagles gather and the doom of tyranny is near. In the South, truth struggles against error and oppression. In the North, fanaticism and intolerance won. In the East, the people begin to know their rights and to be conscious of their dignity, and that the sun's rays will soon smite the summits of the mountains," unquote. Mr. Hutchins informed his readers that the North was where fanaticism and intolerance resided. What he meant by this, and what the symbol of the North represents, will be explored later. And the 6th Masonic writer who confirmed that the North was a place of darkness was Carl Cloudy, who wrote in his book entitled Introduction to Freemasonry, quote, "The place of darkness, the North," unquote. And the reason the Masons do not include the North in their rites is found in the Bible. In the Bible. The reason the Masons do not include the North in their rites is found in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13. Quote, "I," meaning Lucifer, "will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north," unquote. The God of the Bible sits in the north, and Lucifer hopes one day to acquire the throne of God for his throne. But until then, the north is a place of darkness. But while the north is an excluded territory, the east is the place of light and is to be revered. Mr. Hutchins tells his readers why that is so. Quote, "The east, the source of light and thus knowledge," unquote. Albert Mackey quotes Etienne Francois Bazat, a French Masonic writer, in his encyclopedia. Quote, "The veneration which the Masons have for the East bears a relation to the primitive religion whose first degeneration was sun worship," unquote. Rex Hutchins then tells his readers that the Masons deploy lights around the lodge room during the initiation ceremony for the 25th degree, called the Night of the Sun, and he writes, quote, "The ceiling should be decorated to represent the heavens with the moon, the principal planets and the constellations Taurus and Orion, a single powerful light, a great globe of glass representing the sun is in the south. In a physical sense, the greater light comes from the sun, and the transparencies provide lesser light. Symbolically, the sun, or great light, is the truth, and the lesser lights are man's symbolic representation of truth," unquote. Mr. Mackey further discusses this rite of circumambulation, as he calls it, in his encyclopedia. He says that the rite, quote, "exists in Freemasonry. The people always walked 3 times round the altar while singing a sacred hymn. In making this procession, great care was taken to move in imitation of the course of the sun," unquote. He then assisted the reader with understanding this practice in the Masonic temples. Quote, "This rite of circumambulation undoubtedly refers to the doctrine of sun worship," unquote. However, in another of the books that he wrote, Mr. Mackey directly states that the rite is connected to sun worship. This is what he wrote in a book entitled Manual of the Lodge. Quote, "The circumambulation among the pagan nations referred to the great doctrines of Sabaism or sun worship," unquote. Sabaism is defined by Mr. Mackey in his encyclopedia as, quote, "Sabaism, the worship of the sun, moon, and stars, the host of heaven. It was practiced in Persia, Chaldea, India, and other Oriental countries at an early period in the world's history," unquote. He then added this rather cryptic comment, quote, "And although the dogma of sun worship does not, of course, exist in Freemasonry, we find an allusion to it in the rite of circumambulation, which it preserves," unquote. Now one can understand what Mr. Mackey meant by that comment. The Masons do not worship the sun. They worship the sun, with a capital S. So he was telling the truth, but concealing it in a symbolic language, for he wrote sun with a small s. You have to understand the symbology of the mystery schools, or you will never understand anything, dear listeners. Mr. Hutchins then volunteered the information that in the 12th of the 32 degrees, the rite of circumambulation is preserved, and he writes, quote, "In all the Scottish rite degrees thus far, the candidate has made 21 prescribed circuits around the altar. This degree adds 7 for a total of 28. And this practice, called circumambulation, is derived from the ancients and existed among the Romans, Semites, Hindus, and others. It is thought to have been a rite of purification. The sun was believed to travel around the earth. The initiates imitated the movement of the sun when they made circuits around the altar," unquote. Furthermore, dear listeners, in the 9th degree, other symbols of the sun are involved in the ceremony, and Mr. Hutchins tells his readers, quote, "After the obligation is taken, the 9 candles of yellow wax are lit. Yellow is representative of the sun, hence light and knowledge. In the 10th degree, further symbols representing the sun are utilized according to this author. Quote, "There are 3 sets of 5 lights. The wax is yellow, meaning knowledge, and also as the color of the sun represents the deity," unquote. A blatant admission that the sun represents the deity that they worship. Other clues that the sun and the serpent are both known symbols of the Masonic Lodge are given by the titles of 2 of the 32nd degrees inside the Masonic Lodge. The 25th degree initiate is called a Knight of the Brazen Serpent, and the 28th degree initiate is called a Knight of the Sun, with a capital S. There is another symbol of the sun inside the Masonic Lodge, the Worshipful Master. The equivalent of the president of the lodge sits in the east side of the temple, and we are told why that is. Quote, "The Worshipful Master represents the sun at its rising. The Senior Warden, another officer of the lodge, represents the sun at its setting. And the Junior Warden, still another officer of the lodge, represents the sun at meridian, the halfway point, the Most High." Other individuals and organizations besides the Masonic lodges are also involved, folks, in varying degrees with sun worship, or with an acknowledgement that the sun plays a central role in their understanding of the nature of the world. Elizabeth Clare Prophet has been described as being a leader in the New Age movement, and she has written this in a newsletter she publishes called The Coming Revolution. Quote, "The healing of the nations begins with the healing of ourselves. We must draw forth from the great central sun that eternal light with which we were anointed from the beginning," unquote. Adolf Hitler, I'm sure you've heard of him. The head of the German government prior to and during World War II, and who was directly responsible for the murder of over 50 million people, was also a sun worshipper. Very early in his life, he joined a secret organization called the Thule Society. And 40 years after the war, some historians are finally delving into its strange beliefs. Two of these writers, Michael Bertrand and Jean Angelini, have produced a book entitled The Occult and the Third Reich. And one of their conclusions is, quote, "In the Nazi cosmology, the sun played a prime role as a sacred symbol of the Aryans, in contrast to the feminine and magical symbolism of the moon revered by the Semitic peoples," unquote. The Nazi Party was the name of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the party that Mr. Hitler joined. It became the controlling party of the German government prior to and during the war. The Führer, German for leader in this case, meaning Mr. Hitler, saw in the Jewish people with their black hair and swarthy complexion the dark side of the human species, while the blonde and blue-eyed Aryans constituted the light side of humanity. Hitler undertook to extirpate, meaning to eliminate, from the material world its impure elements, to lead it back to glory. But sun worship, as the Masons point out, is not new. The Bible talks about it as well. Folks, Ezekiel was an Old World Testament prophet writing sometime during the period of 571 to 592 BC. And he tells about how he was taken by God to see a practice occurring near the temple. And this is what he wrote in Ezekiel chapter 8, verses 15 and 16. Quote, "And he, the Lord God, brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and they worshipped the sun toward the east," unquote. And Ezekiel points out that the Lord God considered this practice an abomination. There is another reference to sun worship in the Old Testament, this time in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 2 through 4, and then verse 7, and that reference reads as follows. Quote, "If there be found among you man or woman that hath gone and served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun or moon, or any of the host of heaven, and it be true that such an abomination is wrought in Israel, so thou shalt put the evil away from among you," unquote. So, folks, the God of the Bible has made it perfectly clear that sun worship is something that he does not want. He does not want his creatures practicing this. The Bible even went so far as to say in both instances that he considered the practice to be an abomination or an evil. But to show just how far this practice has invaded the Christian community, the following prayer was offered up at a recent funeral in a local Christian church. Quote, "Now you will feel no rain, for your mother, the earth, will fold her arms around you. Now you will feel no cold, for your father, the sun, will always warm you," unquote. Sun worship continues because some Christian churches pray to the sun god in their church services and don't understand who they are praying to. Simply stated, dear listeners, the sun god that they were praying to is Lucifer. Lucifer, also known as Satan or the devil. Wakes you up, doesn't it? See, all the time you thought religion was something stupid, didn't have anything to do with overall world events, but you're wrong. It has everything to do with everything. Whether you believe it or not, whether I believe it or not, doesn't make any difference. If the people who have the power and are in control believe it, it will affect us all. Understand that, because that's true. Now, the Bible, folks, discusses a being called Lucifer in both the Old and New Testaments, and we're going to be talking a lot about the Bible tonight because we have to look at this from every point of view. We've looked at it from the mystery schools, We've looked at it logically, we've looked at it historically, now we're going to look at it from the Bible's point of view, but not strictly from the Bible's point of view, but you need to know this. The Bible discusses a being called Lucifer in both the Old and the New Testaments. Other names for this creature are Satan and the devil. One of the first explanations of just who this being known as Lucifer is found in the Old Testament in a book written by the prophet Isaiah, who wrote around 740 BC. He wrote that Lucifer was created full of wisdom and was perfect. He was created the anointed cherub that covereth the throne of God, and that he actually was upon the holy mountain of God. He later corrupted his wisdom by reason of his brightness. The Bible then records that God cast him to the ground. Isaiah wrote this in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. Quote, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Unquote. Notice that the fall of Lucifer weakened the nations of the world, and this will be examined in other chapters of this study. Quote, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mound of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Unquote. Luke, a writer in the New Testament, records in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, that Jesus said that he beheld, quote, "Satan as lightning fall from heaven." Unquote. Peter records in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, that God has, quote, "spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down," unquote, as well. Paul, another New Testament writer, wrote this about Lucifer in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, in about 57 AD. Quote, "And no marvel, for Satan is transformed into an angel of light," unquote. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, Paul wrote that Satan was capable of working, quote, "lying wonders," unquote. In around 90 AD, John, the author of the book known as Revelation, wrote in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, that Satan was a, quote, "dragon," unquote. Lucifer shows up in the original site of human habitation on earth called the Garden of Eden. The Creator, God, placed Adam, the first man, and later Eve, the first woman, in this garden, but told them that there were certain rules that they had to abide by. And these are spelled out in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Quote, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." Unquote. Later, Lucifer spoke through his serpent to Eve, quote, "Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Unquote. So from the above information, it is possible to glean a little knowledge about the nature of Lucifer. 1. He was cast down from heaven because he desired to ascend directly into the seat of heavenly power, the throne of God. 2. He is referred to as the son of the morning. This appears to be a reference to Lucifer being similar to the sun, which also rises every morning. His desire, number 3, his desire is to sit on the north side of the mountain of God. Lucifer can deceive the world. This is number 4. Lucifer can deceive the world because he has been transformed into an angel of light. And 5, Lucifer can work lying wonders. Now, with those basic understandings, folks, of Lucifer in place, it will be possible to examine the views of others about this fallen entity. However, not all agree with the picture of Lucifer being evil. For Albert Pike wrote this, quote, "There is no rebellious demon of evil or principle of darkness and in eternal controversy with God." Unquote. In fact, Mr. Pike believes that Lucifer was not a force of evil, but could be a force for good, and he wrote this in Morals and Dogma, which I forgot to give you yesterday in the bibliography. That's another one. Write it down, folks. Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. He wrote this in Morals and Dogma, quote, "For the initiates, those initiated into the true secrets of Masonry, this is not a person but a force, created for good, but which may serve for evil," unquote. To further amplify that belief of Mr. Pike's, it becomes important to quote a letter that he wrote on July the 14th, 1889, to the 23 Supreme Councils of the world. Judging from the contents of this letter, it appears that Mr. Pike was attempting to tell the leaders of the various Supreme Councils all over the world that they were to know that Lucifer was the secret god of the Masons. This letter clearly indicates that he believed the position that Lucifer was a god who had come to earth for the good of mankind, and he wrote this, quote, "That which we must say to the crowd is," presumably Mr. Pike meant that the crowd was all of the non-Masons or the public at large, "that which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a god, but it is the god that one adores without superstition," unquote. So it appears that one of the purposes of this letter was to advise all of the top-ranking Masons that they were to concoct a story that the Masons worshipped the traditional god, so that none could ever accuse them of worshiping a cherub, a nun god, by the name of Lucifer. In other words, they were to deny that Lucifer was their god whenever an outsider was smart enough to break through all of the secrets and figure it out. Well, of course, folks, they're sworn to secrecy. They have to deny anything about the true secrets of their order. I mean, what kind of logic is this? That's plain as the nose on your face. You must understand that when you ask a Mason a question about Freemasonry, he's going to tell you a lie because he is sworn to secrecy, and he is sworn by blood oaths. And I know that by the time they've reached the 32nd degree, they've taken at least 32 different oaths swearing them to secrecy. Minimum. So, you should know this already. Now, let's continue, but I'm going to go back and read that part over. It appears that one of the purposes of this letter was to advise all of the top-ranking Masons that they were to concoct a story that the Masons worshipped the traditional god, so that none could ever accuse them of worshiping a cherub, a nun god by the name of Lucifer. It's very important. In other words, they were to deny that Lucifer was their god whenever an outsider was smart enough to break through all of the secrets and figure it out, as I and many others have done, as a Ralph Epperson has done. So the secret inside the Masonic order is that Lucifer is their secret god. Any non-Mason today who attempts to explain to any of their Masonic friends or relatives that this is the secret inside the lodge will be met with an instantaneous denial. Every Mason, whether they know the secret of the lodge or not, will obviously deny the accusation because they must. Mr. Pike continued, quote, "You may repeat it to the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be by all of us initiates of the high degrees maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine," unquote. You see, Albert Pike at that time was at the head of all the lodges of Freemasonry of the world, and at the head of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in the United States of America. Here Mr. Pike seems to indicate that it is the 30th, 31st, and 32nd degrees that are to be taught the Luciferian doctrine. The direct evidence that the honorary 33rd degree is formally taught that Lucifer is the great architect of the universe will be presented later. But here Pike seems to say that that lesson is to be taught at an earlier degree. Quote, "If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians and the Jews, and his priest calumniate," which is defined as spreading false and harmful statements about or to slander, would they calumniate him? Pike makes two incredible statements about Lucifer. One, he is considered to be a god, and two, the priests and the rabbis have it all backwards and are all slandering his name. As has been illustrated, the Bible states that Lucifer is nothing more than a fallen cherub. He's not a god. Yet Mr. Pike clearly states that Lucifer is a god. Now, how can that be? And secondly, those who claim that he is the wicked one are slandering him. Those individuals have it all wrong. And Mr. Pike continued, quote, "The true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai," unquote. Adonai also spelled, well, in the first place here it's spelled A-D-O-N-A-Y, and he says Adonai, also spelled A-D-O-N-A-I, is the Hebrew word for God. To show that Pike was referring to the God of the Bible, he wrote this in his book entitled Morals and Dogma, quote, "Adonai, the rival of Baal and Osiris," unquote. In other words, Adonai is Typhon. That's an aside from me, folks. That's not written in this book. But as you've been listening to this series that I've given you, you know that Adonai, if this is true, if he is the rival of Baal and Osiris, then he is Typhon. As has been illustrated, Osiris is the sun god, and the sun has been shown to be a symbol of Lucifer. Adonai is the rival of Lucifer, both in the Bible and in the writings of Albert Pike. Quote, "But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil," unquote. And here once again Mr. Pike writes that Lucifer and Adonai are rivals, and that the religious world has it all backwards. Lucifer is the good God, and Adonai is the God of evil and darkness. The author would like to interrupt the narrative to make an observation, and this observation is being made by A. Ralph Epperson, not me. He wrote this book. That authenticity of that letter by Albert Pike that was just quoted has been questioned by a variety of writers. It has been reported that Mr. Pike made these comments in an encyclical hand-carried to the meeting of 23 Supreme Councils of the World on July 14, 1889 in Paris, France. This author, meaning A. Ralph Epperson, is willing to concede that the only evidence for the contents of this encyclical consists of it being quoted in a book written by a Frenchman named A.C. de la Rive, entitled La Femme et l'Enfant dans la rank Méconnerie Universelle. I'm not a French speaker, folks, so that's the best I can do. My tongue doesn't do those things. Or at least I haven't practiced to make my tongue do those things. That title translated from French to English means The Woman and Child in Universal French Masonry. A copy of that page that contains that quote and the cover of the book has been supplied to this author, meaning A. Ralph Epperson, by a concerned researcher who had someone locate the book in France for him and make copies of the pertinent pages. The author has read another book that contains the English translation of that encyclical. That book is entitled Occult Theocracy and was written in 1933 by Edith Starr Miller. She cites the book by Mr. de la Rive as her source. She obviously believed that the letter was true and contained the actual thoughts of Mr. Albert Pike. He said it in so many other places, including in his own book, Morals and Dogma, that I also believe that the letter is true, and now I'm speaking as myself, William Cooper. In other words, going back to A. Ralph Epperson's words, in other words, the only source for the letter is a Frenchman who quotes it in his book and not Mr. Albert Pike himself. It must be assumed that Mr. Pike, if he were alive today and was asked whether the letter was his, would deny that he ever wrote such an encyclical, whether or not he had written it, because he must. He's sworn to maintain the secrets. But the reader is admonished to remember that if he did indeed worship Lucifer and wrote the encyclical, he would certainly have to deny it, so that answer would tell the researcher nothing. It is the contention of this writer, A. Ralph Epperson, and others who are attempting to decipher the secret symbols of the Masonic order that a small percentage of the Masons know that all of the symbols inside the lodge refer to Lucifer. And I am one of those who believe this, folks. My research has shown it to be absolutely true, and I can prove it. And I've already given you direct quotes from many Freemasons that already prove it. And it must be remembered that these Masons must, of necessity, do all that they can to deny any revelation of any of the secrets of the lodge. And certainly anyone today who believes that the contents of the letter are a fraud would do all that they could to discredit anyone who said that the thoughts were the actual thoughts of Pike.
However, this writer, meaning A. Ralph Epperson, is of the opinion that Mr. Pike did indeed worship Lucifer, and is not basing that conclusion on just this one letter. Notice that Mr. Pike has written elsewhere that he considered Lucifer to be the secret god of the Masonic Lodge, and I, William Cooper, have also found that to be true, not only in one or two, but in many instances. So it is not essential to this writer's, A. Ralph Epperson's, position that this encyclical be proven to be valid. It is the author's contention that there is ample evidence from other sources, including from Masons other than Mr. Pike, that the secret god inside the Masonic lodges is Lucifer, and I wholeheartedly concur with Mr. Epperson. That evidence is available to anyone who cares to locate it. But there is another Mason who knows that Lucifer is the good god of a particular segment of the Masons. Pike's fellow 33rd degree Mason, Manly P. Hall, also felt that this God was a God of good. He wrote in his book entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages, quote, "Sun worship played an important part in nearly all the early pagan mysteries. The solar deity was slain by wicked ruffians who personified the evil principle of the universe. By means of certain rituals and ceremonies, symbolic of purification and regeneration, this wonderful God of good was brought back to life and became the Savior of his people," unquote. This God who came back to life is not the Jesus of the Bible, because Mr. Hall refers to him as the solar deity. He is referring to the death and resurrection of Osiris, covered in detail in the Masonic rituals, and I've already relayed to you who Osiris really is. In fact, in this series on the mystery religion, I've proven it time and time again. But Manly P. Hall has further identified Lucifer as the god of some of his fellow Masons. He has written this in his book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It's one of the books that I gave you last night, folks. When the Mason, quote, "When the Mason learns the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of the living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy," unquote. Mikhail Bakunin, the Russian anarchist, also addressed this question of evil and good gods, and he wrote, quote, "The evil one is the satanic revolt against divine authority, revolt in which we see the fecund, defined as being fertile, germ of all human emancipations, the revolution. Socialists recognize each other by the words, 'In the name of the one to whom the great wrong has been done.' Satan, folks, is the eternal rebel, the first freethinker, and the emancipator of worlds. He makes men ashamed of his bestial ignorance and obedience. He emancipates him, stamps upon his brow the seal of liberty and humanity, in urging him to disobey and eat of the fruit of knowledge," unquote. You see, I've been telling you all along that socialists and the mystery religion of Babylon are the same, and now, in his book, A. Ralph Epperson has proven it. That thought, that Lucifer was a good spirit to whom a great wrong was done, is the basic thought that holds the New Age together, according to Tex Mars, the author of 2 major books on the subject. And he has written, quote, "Many New Agers commend Lucifer because by tempting Eve he enabled man to evolve toward enlightened knowledge and godhood," unquote. Remember I told you that with the gift of intellect, man will develop technology that will make him God? They are working feverishly in laboratories now to uncover the secret of immortal life. Mr. Mars discusses the thoughts of a leader in a mystical organization called the Stell Group. How many times have I mentioned that? The Stell Group. Named Eklal Koshana. He writes that this New Age leader says that, quote, "Lucifer is the head of a secret brotherhood of spirits. The brotherhood is named after Lucifer because the great angel Lucifer has been responsible for the abolishment of Eden in order that men could begin on the road to spiritual advancement," unquote. Lars Hansen was reared in the Stell Group. Lars Hansen was reared in the Stell Group. Tom Valentine was a member of the Stell Group. Tom Valentine wrote a book called The Life and Death of Planet Earth. Get it and read it, folks. Tom Valentine was associated with the Communist Party. Now he's a member of the Liberty Lobby, which came right out of the old German Nazi Bund. They used to sing the Horst Wessel song at the beginning of their meetings. Wake up! Wake up! Wake up. Why do you think every time somebody calls Tom Valentine and asks him about Freemasonry and their complicity in the conspiracy, he covers it up and hangs up on the person as quickly as possible and denies that there's any complicity of Freemasonry? Tom Valentine has been attacking me for years because he knows that I know who he is and what he's about, that I know the origins of the Liberty Lobby, that I know their message is that our government is no good, it doesn't work, that it's turned against us, and it's all lies. For it's the people who are in these secret societies who have turned against us, who are delivering that message to us to get us to voluntarily overthrow or get rid of our own government, the only government in the history of the world that has ever set man free. And I'm the only one who lets you know this. It's not our government, it's not the Constitution, it's not the Bill of Rights, it's not the structure. It's the secret societies. It's the Tom Valentines. It's the Bo Greitzes. It's all of these people who belong to Freemasonry, and the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, and the Knights Templar, and the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta, and the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, and many more. Many more. Socialist, international socialism, under many, many different names. You see, folks, you see, the senator was right. Senator McCarthy was absolutely right. He was correct. He just didn't know the proper name. He thought he was ferreting out communism. He wasn't. You see, if he understood what I understand, then he would have survived the attacks of the very people that he was trying to ferret out, who owned the media that turned against him and destroyed him. Hollywood, who turned against him and destroyed him through manipulating the opinion of the public. See, communism, folks, is just a word. It's another boogaboo enemy. The real enemy, folks, is Mystery Babylon. I could never say what I said tonight before, because if I had, it would have been misinterpreted. I had to have independent verification that the Stell group worshipped Lucifer before I could reply legitimately to the attacks upon me by Tom Valentine. So there is a basic disagreement about the nature of Lucifer, also known as Satan or the devil. The Bible depicts him as a force for evil, and Mr. Pike and others pictures him as a force for good. But the connection between Lucifer and the ancient mysteries needs to be further amplified. The mysteries had a purpose, to create a Superman. Where have you heard that before? Hitler said it, and they're working in secret in laboratories right now toward the same goal. The mysteries had a purpose, to create a Superman, one capable of understanding the true nature of the universe and to worship the true God. W.L. Wilmshurst, a Mason, wrote these thoughts in his book entitled The Meaning of Masonry. Quote, "This, the evolution of man into Superman, was always the purpose of the ancient mysteries, and the real purpose of modern Masonry is not the social and charitable purposes to which so much attention is paid, but the evolution of those who aspire to perfect their own nature and transform it into more godlike quality," unquote. And need I say as an aside here, what a Freemason said to a friend of mine who was his son? He said, "Son, if you are not one of us, you are nothing." And of course the son was not one of them, and to his great credit has never become one of them. W.L. Wilmshurst amplified this thought a little later in his book. Quote, man who has sprung from the earth, meaning that he was not created by a creator, God, and developed through the lower kingdoms of nature to his present rational state, has yet to complete his evolution by becoming a God-like being and unifying his consciousness with the omniscient, to promote which is and always has been the sole aim and purpose of initiation, unquote. And he goes on, quote, no higher level of attainment is possible than that in which the human merges in the divine consciousness and knows as God knows, unquote. What have I been telling you all this time, folks? So just as Satan tempted mankind with the ability to know good and evil themselves, just like God, without his assistance, now the Masons are teaching that they too could become a god through an initiation into the ancient mysteries. John Anthony West, in his book Serpent in the Sky, wrote this in support of Mr. Wilmshurst's statement, quote, Egypt started with the concept of divine attributes within man. The gods are not brought down to earth, rather man is raised to the gods, unquote. Others, besides the above-mentioned Masons like Louis Feuerbach, have joined the discussion with similar thoughts. He was a 19th century philosopher and a hero of the communists like Karl Marx. In fact, Friedrich Engels, the co-worker with Karl Marx during the time Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto as a hired writer hack, wrote this about his friend. Quote, all the communists of 1845 were followers of Feuerbach. The reason that the communists supported the ideas of Feuerbach is apparent when the student reads his writings, for he wrote, quote, man alone is our God, our Father, our Judge, our Redeemer, our true home, our law, and our rule, the Alpha and Omega of our life and of our political, moral, public, and domestic activity. There is no salvation save through the medium of man, unquote. John Denver, the well-known popular singer, has adopted this same philosophy about his divinity. He has been quoted as saying this after his new conversion. Quote, it's the single most important experience of my life. I can do anything. One of these days I'll be so complete I won't be human, I'll be a god, unquote. It's the same thing that's taught in the Mormon Church. If a married couple produce many children and conform to the teachings of the church, then when they die, they will be gods, and they will be given a planet of their own, and they will continue their reproduction, only they will be souls, and they will populate the planet and will be the gods of the planet. What crap! What absolute crap! Where do these people get their egos? I'll be a god. Yeah, sure you will. If you guys are all gods, then how come you still got to pay your bills? How come you get sick? And how come you got to go to the doctor? And if you go to the doctor, what's that make the doctor if you're God? Huh? You're all a bunch of fools. You're blithering idiots. You've lost your mind. Your egos have run away with the rest of you. And you're going to die like everyone else. And you're going to find out, like everyone else, what really happens when people die. And as far as I know, no one on this earth really knows or is likely to know until it happens to them. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Mr. Hall, the Mason, stated a similar thought when he wrote this in his book entitled Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Quote, we may study the star intellectually, but we have never attained consciousness until we are the star, unquote. But this idea that man could become a god is not new. The Bible anticipated it, and Isaiah wrote about it back in 741 BC. This is what he wrote in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10, quote, thus saith the Lord, understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me, unquote. And once again in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 5, quote, I am the Lord, and there is none else, there is no God beside me, unquote. And remember, all the Roman emperors declared themselves God, and they all died like every other man died, some of them
by the assassin's sword or knife?
God, yeah, Boy, you guys just take the cake, I'll tell you. How you can meet and throw that baloney around to each other and swallow it and pump each other up to believe that you're gods or you're going to be gods is beyond my understanding. The Bible teaches that there is but one God and that mankind has no possibility of sharing his Godhead. One who apparently has not believed those statements in the Bible is Shirley MacLaine, who has become a spokesman for the position that man can become a god. She has written several books on the subject of her support of the New Age. Newsweek magazine described her as the New Age evangelist, and she wrote the following statement in her book entitled Dancing in the Light, quote, "We are part of God," unquote, and this elsewhere in the same book, quote, "If one says audibly, 'I am God,' the sound vibrations literally align the energies of the body to a higher attunement," unquote. Yeah, I bet it does. Yep, I bet the insanity molecules take over every portion of the body, and you really all feel great until you have to go pay your rent. Or you catch the flu. Or somebody just knocks the crap out of you to try to bring you back to reality, which is exactly what should happen when you do those kinds of things. What's wrong with just living life peacefully with other people and enjoying what we have? What's the big thing that you have to become God? And I'll tell you right now, you never will. You might as well just, well, never mind. If you want to be God, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're deceiving yourself, and that's okay as long as you don't hurt anyone else. If each man is a god, mankind is capable of making decisions for their own welfare. Each man has complete control of his decision-making. According to Miss MacLaine, in fact, man's control is extended into areas few have ever claimed for mankind, and these are the thoughts of Miss MacLaine. Quote, "I think we choose to be together. We choose our parents, and I think the parents choose the children they want to have before they ever come in to an incarnation," unquote. Tell that to an abused child. Tell that to a child who's raised by drunken, miserable, stinking parents who don't give a damn about the child. Tell that to all those people who know that that's total, false, irresponsible ramblings of an insane maniac. And you know what they say when they're confronted with this? They say you agreed to it in a previous life, and that you're paying off your karmic debt. You see, they have a rationalization for everything, and it's just more bullshit. More lies, more crap. She went on further to record another strange thought when she wrote this, quote, "There was no such thing as reality, only perception," unquote. Well, Shirley, let me tap you on the jaw with my fist, and then you tell me that there's no reality. Of course, I don't really want to do that, folks, but that's just a way to bring her to her senses. If it were legal, I might try it. Might wake her up. Might show her that her perception is only reality. One can only wonder where Miss MacLaine got these bizarre thoughts from. Several clues that can assist the student in understanding her have been given by either her own revelations or from some articles that have appeared about her in the media. In her book entitled Out on a Limb, she wrote about her meetings with her married lover in her apartment. This God is breaking up somebody else's marriage, and she's meeting with her married lover in her apartment. She commented that he looked at her shelf of books on, amongst other subjects, Marxist theory, including a biography of Karl Marx. There's nothing wrong with that. I have those books in my library and many more. But knowing Shirley MacLaine, and folks, I do, knowing this scatterbrained twit, when she has books on Marxist theory, including a biography of Karl Marx, you can bet that she's a socialist. And of course she is. Parade magazine of December 18, 1988 had an article on Miss McLean in which it revealed that her den had lots of framed pictures. Shirley with communist Fidel Castro and with communist Nikita Khrushchev, amongst others. The magazine reported how Shirley and her lover, quote, talked about democratic socialist principles and how it was possible to have them both at the same time if the rich would only share their wealth more. Elsewhere in her book, she wrote about how much of a hypocrite she was when she added this contradictory statement, and they all do, quote, wanted to talk to him about how I had made a lot of money and that it made me feel elite in a world that was broke to know I could buy just about anything I wished for, unquote. Just like Jane Fonda, who's been pushing for gun control for years, who was stopped by law enforcement officers on the freeway, and her car was found to contain many pistols and weapons, firearms. Hypocrites and liars. However, nowhere in her book did she say that she had freely donated any of her own wealth to the relief of the poor. Apparently, she believes that the communist ideas about wealth sharing are acceptable only as long as she does not have to share her wealth like she wants the other rich to do. You see, most rich purport to be socialist, but in actual practice, none of them really are. None of them would give away their wealth to the poor, ever. Yet they pretend to be liberal, socialist, Marxists. In reality, they demonstrate that they are exactly the opposite. They are liars and hypocrites. For the whole communist socialist idea is for the little people, you and I, who are to be their slaves in the New World Order. Miss McLean has since gone on a nationwide tour promoting her newfound religious views to the public. Newsweek magazine reported in 1987 that she had made a great deal of money explaining her new thoughts to others. Quote, since McLean began her tour in January 1987, more than 10,000 people in 15 cities have paid $300 admission fee, unquote. Well, you know me, folks. I have absolutely nothing against that. If she could have got $1,000 a head admission free, it would be okay with me. Now, 10,000 times 300 equals $3 million. I still have no complaint with that. This is the United States of America. If somebody wants it, give it to them. If they want to pay it, if they're that stupid, that's fine with me. I believe that people should be giving somebody something, though. But I also believe that if they're stupid enough to pay it, then they should be taken. That's how you learn. And a lot of people would disagree with me, but I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry. That's what I believe. Obviously, Shirley's tours have proven to be both popular and lucrative. The Newsweek article on her seminar mentioned a little of what she teaches in them. The following are a few of her comments. Quote, the earth is moving off its axis, she says, and only the collective consciousness of mankind can right it. For the spiritually inclined, a window of light will appear on those days, August 16th and 17th, 1987, that McLean says will allow us to rise to a higher plane of cosmic understanding, unquote, pure bullshit, pure crap, pure New Age mesmerism, if you will, for nothing happened on those dates. Evangelist McLean became Dr. McLean when she reported some of her new cures for two of the world's most serious medical problems, AIDS and cancer of the abdomen. According to the Newsweek article, she told her audience, quote, they, or those who paid to hear her in the 15 cities on the tour, all got to hear McLean's pronouncements on such subjects as AIDS. She thinks sufferers are sick because they have been bereft of love necessary to sustain the balance of health. And cancer. For cancer of the abdomen, she advises putting patients in a yellow room because yellow is the color frequency of that part of the body, unquote. More New Age mesmerism bullshit crap. And to think her patients only have to pay $300 for such wisdom. But Dr. McLean is not as dumb as one might think. The Newsweek magazine article reported, quote, everyone who attended had to sign waivers absolving the seminar's organizers from responsibility for psychological injury, unquote. How clever! How clever of Miss McLean. So someone in charge of arranging her seminars is aware that her ideas might cause psychological damage to those attending, and they have moved to protect her from malpractice lawsuits. Now, not only was this New Age evangelist making money on her personal lecture tours, she was also making money on her best-selling books. Now, I don't know what's wrong with A. Ralph Epperson. I don't know why he's saying this, because he purports to believe in the Constitution and the principles and ideals upon which this country was based, and there is nothing wrong with making money on anyone's personal lecture tours or on their books. And I can tell you right now that A. Ralph Epperson makes money on his lecture tours and on his books, and that's how he makes his living. So as far as I'm concerned, that is a partial discreditation of A. Ralph Epperson. As of July 1987, her book entitled Out on a Limb had sold 3 million copies, and her other major seller, Dancing in the Light, had sold 2.2 million. Could he be jealous? Is it possible that A. Ralph Epperson is jealous of Shirley MacLaine's ability to sell books? Time magazine reported that her 5 books on self-exploration and self-promotion have run to more than 8 million copies. Now, to me, that's admirable. If someone can write something that is so desirable by 8 million people that it sells 8 million copies, I don't care what they're writing about. That's admirable. She's providing an income for herself, her family, and people are obviously buying her books because they want them. Therefore, she's supplying them with a service. Whether it's bullshit or not, it doesn't matter. That's the American way, folks. That's what it's all about. There was a lot of people back in the early part of the century who hated automobiles, and therefore Henry Ford was the devil. But he sold an awful lot of them, and he came under the criticism of a lot of people for doing it. Sorry, folks, that's the American way. As far as I'm concerned, what A. Ralph Epperson is spouting in these few sentences here is socialism. And I admire him for his research and what he's done, and I know that he makes his living selling books and lecturing. And for him to spout this socialist attitude when he is doing the same thing is not acceptable. And he is a friend of mine, and I will certainly bring this to his attention. You know, I read this book a long time ago, and I'd forgotten that he had said these things. But I certainly will bring it to his attention. In fact, we may talk about it on the air when he's a guest of this show, and he will be a guest of this show very shortly. So you can look forward to some kind of an explanation of this. He says it appears as if selling the New Age religion can be very profitable. Well, Barnum and Bailey was very profitable, and it was all an illusion, just like the New Age religion. But in summary, perhaps the most cogent comment about the battle between the New Age and the Christians was made by Nesta Webster in her book entitled Secret Societies. Quote, "The war now begins between the two contending principles, the Christian conception of man reaching up to God, and the secret society conception of man as God, needing no revelation from on high, and no guidance but the law of his own nature. And since that nature is in itself divine, all that springs from it is praiseworthy, and those acts, usually regarded as sins, are not to be condemned." Unquote. You've heard me say before that in the New World Order, the law will be, "Do as thou wilt" shall be the whole of the law. And it will. The battle lines are drawn between those who believe in a creator God and those who believe that man can become God. These are the two opposing positions, and the battle between them, dear listeners, has most certainly begun. Now, don't get too upset over my criticism of the few paragraphs that A. Ralph Epperson wrote condemning Shirley MacLaine's ability to write books and lecture and bring in a lot of money. For I'm sure that in his zeal, which many of us get carried away with, in his zeal to condemn the worship of Lucifer and the secret societies, he carried it a little bit too far. But We'll bring it up when he's a guest on the show. For I'm a little bit curious about it myself, but I haven't jumped off the edge. Let's put it that way.
I'm holding in my hand an old, faded, what used to be red, hardbacked, covered book. It's almost orange now because it's faded with age, entitled Fundamental Laws, 68th Convocation. On the front of the cover is some of the symbology of the mystery schools. There is a rope representing the snake eating its own tail, also known as the magic circle. Within this magic circle, there is a triangle, actually 3 triangles, one within the other. Within the triangles, there's the symbol of the skull and bones. There's the symbol of wings around the world. There's the symbol of the ark, the anchor, and the 3 letters TRY beneath the 3 triangles. This is the verbatim written report published in 1916, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm going to read to you from. Fundamental Laws, a report of the 68th Convocation of the Rose Cross Order, giving a resume of the proceedings of the convocation, together with most of the lectures that were delivered during this time of the convocation by the several delegates present. Also a report of the work of ancient initiation in the Grove of Osiris as especially prepared for the occasion. Below that is the symbol of a triangle with 3 stone steps representing the 3 degrees of initiation. Up on the top step is a cross, in the center of which is a rose. And beneath the triangle, again, the 3 letters TRY. This is copyrighted 1916, published by the Philosophical Publishing Company, Allentown, Pennsylvania, for the members of the Rose Cross Order. On the next page is a roll of honor. One of the names here stands out and almost knocked me over when I saw it, for the name is Lars Hansen. Now, it is not the Lars Hansen that we've discussed on this show, and we're going to look into it to find out if this was his father, our grandfather, or great-grandfather. Could have been either one of the 3. But we will find out, believe me. We know that Lars Hansen's parents were members of the mystery school, and in particular, the Metternich-Stell group, where Lars Hansen was reared. In explanation of the contents of this book, and I'm reading verbatim from the introduction in explanation. In explanation of the contents of this book, it is to be stated that these articles do not give the inner work of the Rose Cross Order, but simply the outer, the public teachings. Now, you'll remember in the Mystery School series, I taught you about the exoteric and the esoteric. What you're going to get in this book, because they never publish the esoteric anywhere, it's always hidden in symbology, but there are incredible admissions in this book that you will hear in the exoteric. Reading again, verbatim. The Illuminati and its soul science work may be called the child of the Rose Cross Order. Years ago it was found that where there was one person who desired to follow the work with heart and soul, in other words, who was willing to live the life as taught by the order, there were 100 others who desired teachings from the order, but who were not willing to dedicate their lives to the sublime work. Now, I break from this for a moment to remind you that I have previously stated that the fraternity of Freemasons, the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta, the Knights Templars, the Mormon Church, all of these, the Illuminati, the Order, the Skull and Bones, are all the same organization. And what you have just heard is the first admission of that fact, and you are going to hear more as I progress. And remember, I'm reading this right out of their own publication, a hard-bound book published by the Philosophical Society in Allentown, Pennsylvania, specifically for the Rose Cross Order. Continuing. These thousands had to be taken care of, and as a result, the Illuminati and its soul science work was born. When in April, now that's April of 1916, folks, April of 1916, remember that. When in April the order went forth to the brethren that a sacred convocation was to be held, all delegates were requested to prepare articles on soul science so that regular lecture sessions could be held. The lectures that follow are the result. All these lectures were given in open session and are to be considered as soul science work, though in entire harmony with the teachings of the Rose Cross Order. The work of the Rose Cross Order as given to its students can never be published. It is a secret, sacred work between teacher and student. Let me read that again for you. It is a secret, sacred work between teacher and student. It is a soul training, an inner initiation, and such work continues until the student has reached initiation, after which he is called upon to attend a convocation, and at which time the degree work is conferred upon him. But the inner work always precedes the outer work, as the outer work is only a bond binding together the brotherhood. Thus a word in explanation. Many, having heard of the great order and its work, and actually knowing nothing of its inner work, have ignorantly or with fraudulent intent established so-called Rose Cross bodies. And these bodies, knowing nothing of the true work of the Rose Cross, have nothing but a ritualistic initiatory rite or degree work. We would refer all seekers to authorities on the Rose Cross and on initiation, and they will then find that the true Rose Cross is actually a school of spirituality with a degree ceremonial initiation as the climax. And this is signed by the Hierophant of the order. In the preface, early in the summer, instructions were received from the hierarchies to call the inner circle of the Rose Cross Order into session, and thus to fitly celebrate the 68th year of the Rose Cross Order in America. Orders were immediately issued to those who have the privilege of attending this convocation, and on June the 1st, 1916, the convocation was called to order and the preliminary lectures were started. At this convocation, all delegates were instructed to prepare and to deliver articles which should have a bearing on the conditions of the present day and which should be the means of helping humanity. However, because of the limited amount of time at the disposal of those who could attend, only a few were enabled to prepare such lectures, with the results that there were not as many lectures delivered as might have been had the delegates had more time at their disposal. But even so, there were from 2 to 3 lectures each day, and most of these lectures will be found in this present volume, though many of the lectures cannot be given in book form, as they were only delivered as from teacher to those of the inner circle. From the beginning of the month until the day of the 13th, there were lectures in the Assembly Hall, which had been built in 1910 for the express purpose of holding these yearly convocations. But on the 13th, there were no lectures, as all of the day was required for making the preparations necessary in order that the ancient mysteries might be given to the delegates in a form of symbolism consisting of 3 degrees. I can do no better than to give the article prepared by Grace K. Morey of Buffalo, New York, the secretary of the Rose Cross Sacred College for the Buffalo, New York, papers, and which appeared in the Buffalo Express, July 16th, 1916. This is entitled Ancient Mysteries of Egypt Given in an Initiation of 3 Degrees. Pay close attention, folks, for what you're going to hear now confirms much of what I have been revealing to you, quoting from the book once again. Under the authority of the Rose Cross Order, founded in America in 1858, prominent delegates of the order were gathered in the most remarkable conclave held during the last 5,000 years.
the publication of whose records now opens to the world the connection of Egypt in her ages of true religion, power, and glory with the mystic seal of the United States, whose heraldic symbolism declaring the mighty destiny of America has until now only been known to a limited number. Not anymore. At Beverly Hall, in the beautiful Tohickon Valley, about 4 miles from the town of Quakertown, men and women of all ranks of life and from all parts of the world, high Masons and members of the Eastern Star, physicians, teachers, authors, and members of all denominations, inclusive of the Hebrew, all these assembled at the call of the Grand Master of the Rose Cross Order for the 68th Convocation. And that should silence the cockroaches who are now scurrying from the light, who say that they are not all one order. They are known as the Brotherhood, the Order, the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, the Fraternity of Freemasons, and, of course, those of you who have been listening know the rest. Reading again from the book, some years ago, R. Swinburne Clymer, author of The Philosophy of Fire, Ancient Mystic Oriental Masonry, The Rosicrucians, Their Teachings, Mysteries of Osiris, Soul Science and Immortality, and over 30 other works, bought a mountainous tract of land, and on this was built, quote, Beverly Hall, unquote, an assembly hall, press rooms and libraries and chemical laboratory, which surrounded by orchards, vineyards, and rose gardens, set in terraced lawns, presents with its collie kennels and poultry plants a splendid combination of the beautiful and the practical. To this has been added the mystic, for in a secluded and wooded tract of 50 acres of this land, an artificial lake was made from a mountain stream, a throne room erected, and other improvements made which would be needed for the initiation of neophytes in the Egyptian mysteries. The convocation was called to order on June 1st in the Assembly Hall, built over 5 years ago for that purpose, and the delivery of a series of lectures upon practical as well as mystical subjects began and continued until the close of the convocation. The delegates and teachers presented the lectures, which were followed by discussions upon the subjects of eugenics, scientific motherhood, code of ethics for the schools and home, spiritual Christianity, that's a joke, personal hygiene, diet and health, sin, authority and individuality, Jacob's ladder, initiation, reincarnation, soul development, the second coming of the Christ, and the mystic significance of the seal of the United States. In the time of Solomon, as in the time of the Egyptian priesthood, no ceremony was ever held unless the circle of Solomon, commonly called the sacred seal of Solomon, had been previously prepared. But since the fall of Egypt and of the Temple of Solomon, this seal has been practically unknown, except to a limited number of students of ancient religions and mysteries. Folks, the seal of Solomon is not the six-pointed star which is on the flag of Israel. It is not the seal of David or the Star of David. It is not the seal of Solomon, as you will soon discover. During the first week in June, in the grove, especially prepared for the dramatization of the ancient mysteries of Osiris, the seal of Solomon, often called the Magic Circle, was especially built, and on June 11th, the dedication of the Magic Circle took place in the presence of the delegates of the Rose Cross Order, some of whom were natives of Germany, England, and Russia. This was in accordance with the system as practiced by the ancient priests of Egypt and the Sanhedrin of the Temple of Solomon. On the night of June 13th, the first session of the class, including those of the order taking part in the initiation, assembled in the grove of Osiris, which was illuminated by electricity from a central powerhouse especially prepared for the purpose, and the initiation of the ancient mysteries of Egypt in 3 degrees and 6 scenes. All students
of the ancient mysteries and religions know that in the Temple of Solomon there were 3 courts. The outer court for the people being composed of 700 selected teachers and leaders. These were members of the first degree, Illuminati called also seekers, travelers, or soldiers. The middle court, or members of the second degree, were 70 in number, and were supposed to be in the hall of meditation, and acted as mediators between the people and the inner sanctuary. Above all was the inner court, or circle of the 7 priests, and the master or high priest, who were the teachers between God and man, mediators between the seen and the unseen. In the Egyptian mysteries, the first court was made up of the royal youth of Egypt, and such students from foreign countries as desired to enter the temple and priesthood, and these during probation were often known as, quote, soldiers of the priesthood, unquote, as it was their duty while undergoing the preliminary training and test to guard the priesthood and its work even to the death. The second class, corresponding to a second degree, were those who had passed this test, and who were in the hall of meditation and purification in preparation for the first vows and the dedication of the body, mind, soul, and spirit to God and the service of mankind. The third class, called the third degree, were those who had passed with credit the tests of the first degree, the purification of the second, as well as the various stages of development required of all students in the halls of meditation. In the royal third degree, which took place in the temple, the neophyte received the final instruction. After this came the final test in the beautiful ceremony of the death of the old life, the giving up of the body and its temptations, and the raising of the slain Osiris, our spiritual body, by his faithful spouse Isis, the soul, with the final illumination. On the 15th of June, the first section of the representatives left Beverly Hall for their respective homes, and the second section began to arrive for the preparatory lectures, and on the 19th of June, the ceremonies were repeated so that all might witness the initiation and take part in it so as to become members. So far as can be learned, either through travel or history, never before since the fall of Egypt and its priesthood and the fall of the Temple of Solomon has there ever been a grove, a lake to represent the Nile, a magic circle, or a temple prepared, nor is it believed that anywhere in the world does there today exist such a circle. Nearest to this, however, is Stonehenge of the Druids of Britain, to which their descendants travel each year at a certain time to greet the sun and renew their vows. This is the first time, therefore, in 5,000 years that any order has attempted to build up this sacred emblem under the stately oak, so that people of modern civilization might witness the beauties of the life and religion of the ancient people, whose teachings of individual soul development made the glory of Egypt, the lost dreams of all Israel, the teachings of the Magi of Persia, all that was true in India, the splendid philosophy of Greece, the magnificence of the early Romans, the basis of pre-Christian Ireland's great schools, as well as the familiar Holy Grail legends of Britain, Celt, and Gaul. In this light of brotherhood of man and fatherhood of God was founded this great republic foretold by Virgil, upon whose seal is set the Egyptian pyramid, completed by the white stone of spiritual purification as the crown of the ages. In the winter, far beneath the snow, lies a seed that with the sun's love becomes the rose. You see, the mystery schools speak to each other in symbology, in a symbolic language that they have learned to use over the millennia to hide their real secrets, their real intent, their real work, which has always been from the beginning to reestablish on this earth an ancient government ruled by a council of wise men, a benevolent despotism, a one-world totalitarian socialist government. Don't ever forget that, folks. If you love being free, the New World Order utopia is not for you, and it certainly is not for me. Continuing now from the book entitled Fundamental Laws, the publication of a report of the 68th Convocation of the Rose Cross Order, during which they admit the existence of the Illuminati, they admit the existence of the Order, they admit the existence of the Brotherhood, they admit that all of these secret organizations, including Freemasonry, are all the same organization, all working toward the same goal. An incredible admission printed in their own publication, a hardbound book found up on a dusty shelf way back in the rear corner of an old used bookstore. Quoting again from the book, the American constellation of 13 stars, set in the form of a double triangle, was foretold by Merlin of King Arthur's court, and the philosophy of the Holy Grail and of Egypt's glory and Solomon's temple has been the day star of every great American statesman from Washington to Abraham Lincoln. Now, if you've been listening to this program, you know the day star is a reference to Lucifer, the light bringer, the angel of light, the morning star, also known as the son of the morning. After the ceremonies in the grove, there was given in the dining room of Beverly Hall at midnight a feast of the gods, at which neither meat nor spices formed part of the menu, but only fruits, nuts, and other products of sun-kissed foods. And that should tell you something about sun-kissed oranges. The conclusion of the rites was held at sunrise in the grove with a musical communion service, at which nectar of roses distilled from the 30,000 roses blooming each June upon the lawns at Beverly Hall was served as emblematic of the wine of the soul, and for this service the rose bushes were planted several years ago. This is also from the book, folks. I wish that all the readers of this book might have been present at the preparation, at the building, and at the dedication of this ancient magic circle. Or I wish that I might be able to give a detailed description of these sublime ceremonies in this book. However, I cannot do this here, though I hope that in some future work I will be able to do so. Sufficient be it to say that when the stone, made out of cement by one of the brothers, was nearly finished, the dedication took place, and the emblems placed in the stone itself before it was completed were the American Beauty Rose in full bloom, this as a representation or symbol of the soul that has reached full illumination. The mystic ring, this was a solid gold ring belonging to one of the members present, upon which had been engraved the cross and the pentagram. All members of the Magi will know what this symbol stands for. The ring itself, as is known to the Magi, is a protecting agent against all evil or malignant influences when worn during any ceremonial or developing work. And the true magic mirror, this is an emblem of the soul, which when fully developed will act as a mirror to the universe, wherein may be wisdom and truth. Lastly, a complete copy of the private textbook entitled, quote, Ritualistic Occultism, unquote, which contains the ceremonies as made use of by the Magi. And 4 of these ceremonials were made use of by 4 of the Magi in the dedication of the magic circle. When all of this had taken place, the stone was completed, and then later in the day the characters were engraved upon the stone by the brother who had completed the stone. Of the midnight feast to the gods, and of the morning services which took place in the grove, it is not lawful for me to speak at this time. But it is my sincere prayer that all who are enrolled in the sacred schools may someday be present with us and witness these sublime ceremonies, especially as they are conferred in the spring of the year. In the spring of the year. Arrangements were made by the delegates present through voluntary contributions to either buy another large grove, or if that is found impracticable,
to build a much larger hall in the Grove of Osiris, so that advanced ceremonies may be held the coming spring at the 69th Convocation of the Rose Cross Order. Now I'm going to reveal something to you that I have never told you before on this program. I've been working up to it, and now is the time to tell you before I read from the next section of this book. For then you will understand what has been happening in the last 50 years and what is happening now. It was Harry Truman, a 33rd degree Freemason, who signed the United Nations Treaty, who pushed through and signed the United Nations Participation Act. It was also Harry Truman, a 33rd degree Freemason, operating in concert with Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, a member of the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta and of the Order of the Knights Templar, who created the National Security Act, pushed it through Congress. Harry Truman signed it. It created the umbrella of national security, a curtain of secrecy. It created the Central Intelligence Agency, and behind this curtain of secrecy, the secret societies have been working to destroy the sovereignty of all nations and bring about a one-world totalitarian socialist government. And folks, all of the bugaboo enemies that you've been afraid of all your life were never enemies at all. For these were deceptions, manipulations. The only enemy, folks, that the people of the world have ever had is right here in this country, down at the corner in your town, in the temple that has no windows. And now, reading again from the book, the report from the 68th Convocation of the Order of the Rose Cross. Introduction to the Great Seal. It is rather a strange and an unknown thing for one to write an introduction to a single chapter appearing in a book, but the conditions are so unusual as to warrant it. More than a year ago, Grace K. Morey, the author of the article, The Great Seal of the United States and Its Mystic Significance, prepared a sketch for a short primer of the Illuminati teachings. And in this sketch, as will be shown by the drawings, it was brought out that man is not only a threefold being, but that he is actually a fourfold being as well. In short, that when he has succeeded in reaching soul illumination, he is the completed pyramid or true triangle. If the student will give serious study to the article on the seal of the United States, he will find that on the reverse side of the seal, which is as yet uncut, there is to be found the pyramid, but with the capstone as yet not placed, and thus he will see that the philosophy of the Illuminati is the absolute and undeniable philosophy upon which these United States are founded, as is clearly indicated by our fourfold philosophy, by the drawings representing our philosophy, and by the drawings of the reverse side of the United States seal. And thus it would appear that the unseen hierarchies which shaped the foundation of the great republic which must some day rule the world are the same hierarchies which gave us the soul science philosophy as taught by the Illuminati. And now you know why what has happened in this country has happened, and you now know why what is happening today is happening, and you now know why on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States are the words Novus Ordo Seclorum, which literally translated means the new order of the ages, also known, ladies and gentlemen, as the New World Order. But I won't let you rest with that shock. Listen to this, dear listeners. Hold on to your chairs, because the incredible admission that is coming to you right out of the pages of this book is going to knock you flat. Reading again from the book. And thus it would appear that the unseen hierarchies which shape the foundation of the great republic which must someday rule the world are the same hierarchies which gave us the soul science philosophy as taught by the Illuminati. And now let us look into the future, not far, but just beyond the line. We find that scholars condemn the design of the reverse side of the United States seal, that it has never been cut, but has remained hidden as though it were something to be ashamed of. However, though this appears the truth, it is not the truth. The reason why it has never been cut is because the time is not yet, as the capstone has not yet been set. And what is this capstone? My reader, prepare for a shock. When Atlantis ruled the world, that which is now America was connected with Egypt by what is now Mexico, and in Mexico and the territory of Yucatan there is a pyramid in which the fire philosophers worshipped God as divine fire and life in like manner as did the initiates of Egypt, for the two were then one. America is not complete, and will not be complete, cannot be complete, until Mexico is again part of America as she was in the long ago. And when Mexico is once again a part of the United States, then will the capstone have been set on the pyramid, and the reverse side of the United States seal will be cut. Thus you will see that the Soul Science Primer with its drawings is but the beginning of the article concerning the seal of the United States, while the article on body, mind, spirit, and soul is the final thereof. May it not be long until the Holy Pyramid shall be completed, and may it be completed without the shedding of blood. Lovingly given, R. Swinburne Clymer, Beverly Hall, Quakertown, Pennsylvania, July 6, 1916. And now you know the final truth, ladies and gentlemen. Now you know the purpose of the free trade agreements. Now you know the purpose of GATT and NAFTA. Now you know where we're headed. Now you know that the middle class in this country is doomed. Now you know that the New World Order is being brought about by the intelligence community and the secret societies whose headquarters are in the United States of America, just 13 blocks from the White House. Now you know, in the incredible admissions in their own writing in this book published by the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, now you know that the Illuminati is real, that Freemasonry is a part of the Illuminati, that the Rose and Cross is a part of the Illuminati, that they are also called the Order, the Brotherhood, that they also consist of the Knights Templars, they also consist of the Knights of Malta, and all of the other secret societies whose organizational structure is in the shape of a pyramid, with a few at the top who really know what the great work and the great plan is, and a whole bunch of slathering idiots thirsting after the secrets on the bottom who will never, ever know anything. Are the cockroaches scattering? If this broadcast doesn't do it, nothing will. If this doesn't wake you up, ladies and gentlemen, nothing will. If you don't understand now, you will never understand it now or in the future. If you don't know where we're headed now, then you never will. If you are not concerned now, then you have already placed the chains upon your ankles, and you have already watched freedom fly. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have heard tonight is the final parting of the curtain. It is the opening of the last door that was to be opened. It is the final understanding of where we have been, where we are at, and where we are going. It is the light. It is the illumination in the darkest corners. You are looking at the forbidden fruit. You have heard tonight what you were never to hear, what has been forbidden for thousands of years. You now know
what the great work is. You now know who is bringing it about. You too can find this book if you search hard enough in the incredible admissions that are contained within it. Will give you the ammunition and the armor to march out here on the battlefield with me and many others who are trying to stop what is coming. Remember what Mr. Swinburne said at the end of his article, and I'll read that to you again. May it not be long until the Holy Pyramid shall be completed, and may it be completed without the shedding of blood. Lovingly given, R. Swinburne, Clymer, Beverly Hall, Quakertown, Pennsylvania, July 6th, 1916. And I am telling you now, their goal is to destroy all other religions save theirs, destroy all existing nation-states save theirs, and shackle the mob, and that is you.